Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Friends and Enemies. This is a Happy New Year. This is the 3rd of January. We're doing this broadcast. The morning we woke up to hearing Maduro had been arrested and taken into custody by the U.S. government. We've got an uprising in Iran ongoing. We've got Trump rebuking Putin for staging a fake drone attack on himself or presenting fake evidence. So we've got things active. We've got Ukraine, of course, still kicking the snot out of the Russians when they try to attack. Um, so, Alex, maybe you want to comment on the Venezuela events first. We can go. It's dramatic. It's happening. During the night, special forces went in with diversionary attacks, drew away the security detail around President Maduro of Venezuela, and basically took him and his wife into custody. And they're being taken to the United States now for trial as drug traffickers. And I guess, is it money laundering? I forget. But why don't you explain it to us?
All right, so we see all these different. We see concrete action now in various theaters, very dramatic things happening in various places in the world, and they're all sort of connected. There's something happening over here, and it affects something that's going on over there. Now, obviously, it's not just the Russians that are freaking out now over this Venezuela situation. And I remember a report from I think a few weeks or a few months ago where Russia kind of said in public that the Russians said that we're not going to overstretch ourselves basically to protect Venezuela because it's just too far away and too expensive. So, and it's also the Chinese are freaking out because the Chinese have been very, very active in Latin America and places, various countries over there. And I've been there personally. I spent weeks in Panama and in Costa Rica, and I got to meet General Stubblebine and all that, and I saw the shopping malls, I saw the Chinese goods, and I saw the Chinese investment, and they wanted to go in big, just like the Chinese have been trying in Africa. So it's always like subsidized products. Everything Chinese is cheaper and seemingly more cost effective, but how long can you subsidize everything and run at a loss? At what point do you have to expand as an empire like the Chinese, a communist, and push world revolution and find these new customers and these new workers and these new slaves, basically these new communist serfs? So the Venezuela thing is also a problem for the Chinese, and the Chinese are calculating right now, the Russians are calculating right now, what's the fallout of this going to be? Same with Iran. What's the fallout? Can we stabilize this? What does it cost us to stabilize this? Does this affect our other plans that we have? Like, example, the race for the Arctic, this gigantic bowl, basically this gigantic battleground with many different countries, and they all want it. And it's like going to be a joint communist advance, a joint communist military operation in the Arctic with the Russians and the Chinese. So it's all like it's this imperial game that the communists have to play, even though they claim to be the end of imperialism. They want to be the antithesis to imperialism, but they are playing a very old game. They're playing a very dangerous game, and they have to calculate.
They claim
Because
to be the antithesis of fascism too, but they are in practice fascists.
Yeah, they play the blood and soil game like every other country would do, especially in war times. They will do the whole blood and soil thing because it's kind of effective in war times. And also I put up this piece a few days ago, and the video you can also find on this YouTube channel. So please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done so, and check out the websites that I'm gonna show on the screen real quick in a moment here, jrnyquist.blog and others. So I put up this piece and I made a video. It explains how espionage was born because empires had to calculate. They had to have a balance sheet, and you could say every empire is a balance sheet etched into geography. So you have limited resources. You have to put the resources right where you need them, the right amount at the right time, with the right propaganda attached to it. So this is kind of the game that the Russians have have to play and the Chinese have to play. But this is also the game the U.S. has to play. So how many resources are is the United States government going to put into this Venezuela thing? Will we see a couple of 10,000 Marines? Will we see a full-blown regime change? Maybe the espionage, the Anglo espionage, has been better than we thought all along, or better than we expected, or we feared all along. Maybe they have more assets in play in Venezuela. They bought the right people, or they convinced the right people, and there's going to be like a regime change from within, and somehow this is going to happen without a major warfare. How much resources is this going to take? How much resources is the United States willing to spend on this? Because they have to cover all these other areas. They have to focus on the Arctic, China, wars in Asia. And the Europeans, as I said before, the Europeans, the EU, they have to focus on Russia as well and protect Ukraine. And this has to be sort of coordinated. It's a division of tasks. You can't expect one bloc to do it all, right? And I think this is when strategic deception comes in. This is when, let's say, NATO could pretend to be divided, or NATO could pretend to be weaker than it really is. I mean, this is kind of the most basic type of deception and warfare. You don't want to show your hand. You don't want to show the enemy how coordinated you are, how you really make decisions. Now, with Trump, we see this back and forth, right? So this ritual seems to repeat itself every couple of months. So this talk of peace talks about Ukraine. And then there's media reports, and those media reports, they say, "Oh, look, the Trump admin, the Trump admin wants to sell out Ukraine again, total sellout." But then you look into the fine print, and then it's kind of different. And before these new peace talks, there's more help from the U.S. to Ukraine, more missiles, better tech, allowing Ukraine to use specific missiles deeper into Russian territory. So there's all this stuff going on that never really makes the big headlines. So it's all like this, seems like a back and forth. It seems like it's, Trump is making it up as he goes along. And maybe that's true for Trump, right? But there's a system behind Trump, or besides Trump. Now, media reports recently noticed again that Project 2025 is being implemented. As we've heard about this, and we talked about this on the show before, when it was published, at least the unclassified version for public consumption, it was all these different points how they were going to reduce government waste and foreign policy and internal policy. It was very anti-communist. They kind of made some pretty clear statements, and now we see, and the media is reporting that this is being implemented. So it's not just Trump; it's Heritage Foundation, it's all these different places. There's a possibility that Trump has been used by this. Trump has been used by the system to kind of confuse the Russians somewhat, confuse the Chinese somewhat. And confuse maybe all the rest of the world for strategic purposes. Now, this is sort of the things we need to be thinking about right now, and also people who are voters with the midterms upcoming. People have to think properly about this. Don't go crazy and listen to some weird influencers and make decisions based on those influencers. Like I'm not gonna vote because Trump had this, the leader of Venezuela snatched. And Trump had promised, Trump promised no more interference, no more foreign entanglements. But at the same time, even in 2015, before he was president for the first time, Trump had already given this large speech about his foreign policy ideas. It was very clear. And I said this at the time, look at what he's saying. He wants to be like Reagan. He wants to have American leadership. But the MAGAs at the time, they didn't want to hear it. They only wanted to hear the little bits that were prepared for them. Like no foreign entanglements. As if you could let the world just run itself. Like these communist regimes and these crazy places like Iran and just let them do whatever they want to do. Make nuclear weapons, make chemical weapons and biological weapons, and coordinate with each other, and they invade our spaces. Let them do whatever they want. No, you need foreign bases, you need foreign allies, and you need espionage, and you need clandestine operations. So we need to we need to analyze this properly and look through the haze, because even when there's strategic deception, even when somebody like Trump has been used to confuse the world, basically to protect America and to protect what's really going on, these sort of plays and plots, they can be dangerous, they can backfire. We've seen this before in history. So I think we need more clarity, and people need to be responsible. Every single one out there, every voter, everybody who's alive right now, they need to be very responsible and not be over emotional, because everybody has emotions. Even my dog has emotions, right? I mean, emotions are important. They are part of who we are and what we do. They can help what we do, but they can also get in the way, right? And so everybody has emotions. Even my dog has emotions. It's not the all end all be all decisive thing. And there's no gimmicks, right? There's no simple gimmicks that explain everything. And with the Russia is saving the world, or the globalists this or that, and the other. I mean, do you see the clip of Tucker Carlson recently when he said something like when Tucker Carlson said something like, well, the Russians are about to become the world leading white Christian nation, and that's why the globalists hate them.
That's so insane.
And that's why the globalists hate Russia, and they want to hit Russia, either directly or with proxies like Ukraine or in Venezuela. This is the evil globalists. They want to hit poor Russia because the Russians are like this. They're going to be the number one Christian conservative nation.
Is Tucker Carlson just stupid, or is he just bought?
Yeah, I mean, when did he start with this Muslim stuff? When he said, "Well, most Muslims are so good, and don't talk bad about the Muslim world." I mean, it's like, what happened? When did this start? And people notice, and it was even community notes on X attached to this clip from Tucker, where the community notes said, well, there's a really significant Muslim population segment in Russia right now. It's bigger than Europe in Europe, and it's growing faster in Russia as well. So where's Tucker pulling this out from? What places is he pulling this stuff out from? So you can't judge these things by gimmicks. And so you can't judge the Venezuela thing with a gimmick, and you also can't, if this Iran situation becomes even more unstable now, because they're going broke right now and Russia can't stabilize them. You can't judge that either with the same gimmick, saying, "Oh, the globalists want to harm Russia by harming Iran." It's like. And what about the Chinese? Are the globalists? Are the Chinese now the good ones? Because if the Chinese are against the Americans, does it mean the Chinese are the good ones now? The globalists hate the.
That's what Owen Schroyer was saying a couple of years back. He was saying Russia and China are the good guys and America's the bad guys. This is what this whole MAGA right wing, kind of. Alt-right kind of movement has done. They've attempted to make this reversal and try to make Russia the conservative power, when Russia's still run by the same old communist elites that they were run with before. They're allied with China. They're working with Venezuela and Cuba. They've got North Koreans defending them. It's. I think Kim Il-jung gave a New Year's greeting to Putin, and it was a typical communist camaraderie type of thing. I mean, when are people going to wake up? That Tucker Carlson is carrying forward the deception from Gorbachev that we're reforming and that we're not, and Boris Yeltsin, that we're not communists anymore. I mean, come on, guys. When they invaded Ukraine, they started putting up the red hammer and sickle flag and statues of Lenin. They're putting up statues of Stalin now. They want to rename the city Volgograd, Stalingrad again. They're going to probably return St. Petersburg to Leningrad one of these days. They started re-Sovietization officially, what was it, 2 years ago last November? So it's like, come on, people, they're invading for the purpose of putting the Soviet Humpty Dumpty back together again and saying they're going all the way to Berlin.
Yeah.
That's what the commander of the Russian land forces has publicly said
And it's
twice on Russian television.
and besides some of these antics, especially the Trump antics, which get all the attention, right? And besides these antics, it seems that policy, the actual U.S. policy, it seems so normal, for a Republican administration. This is some of the stuff that reminds you of Reagan and some other presidents of the past, getting involved in these other countries, the Cuban Missile Crisis, or interfering in places like what was it, Honduras, or Nicaragua and stuff like that. So this is something we've seen before. It's nothing too crazy. It's nothing too unusual. And I think this is what's going to give the U.S. A lot of credibility. Once people realize that Trump is not forever, and it's so normal. The pushback that we've seen in Vietnam or in Korean War, we've seen this before. And when things go bad, when it's very dramatic, there's like a looming world war or a semi-world war coming up, people will actually remember this has happened before, and we came out, or well, not we Germans, but the West in general, we came out on top, sort of, not fully, not on the espionage front, but they will actually remember this, and it's like history really rhymes. I mean, there's this story here that is connected, especially to this Venezuela thing. It says here, the son of a Wehrmacht lieutenant, how Chile's most right-wing president since Pinochet came to power. So in 2019, protesters in Chile demanded that the country adopt a new constitution to replace the current Pinochet-era document. However, when the left-wing government that came to power on the strength of that movement failed to implement the promised social reforms, voters responded by electing far-right leader José Antonio Cast, who won a landslide victory in December's presidential election. Cast, the son of a lieutenant in the German Wehrmacht, an admirer of Pinochet and a friend of Argentina's chainsaw-wielding president Milei, promises economic freedoms for capital, for business, and he favors a crackdown on illegal migrants and all that sort of thing. So this is happening in various places. So, I mean, you had these countries, these torn countries that were going back between right-wing governments and communist governments and coups and counter-coups, right? Very poverty-stricken populations. Socialism, communism cannot lift them from this poverty. Socialism cannot do it.
Look at Venezuela; it just sunk the country into
Yeah,
starvation.
and it's this
By the
problem when
way,
you have.
if people don't know, a third of the population of Venezuela has fled the country,
Oh
and they
yeah,
wouldn't be able to be fed there if they'd stayed. So they were leaving to save their lives, not because they wanted a promise of a better life in America. They left Venezuela because they saw tyranny coming. And all these MAGA people who are complaining, who are saying Trump has betrayed us, Trump promises no more wars. I'm sorry, these wars are being imposed on us. And Venezuela is a country that has got, I'm sorry, it's got intermediate range ballistic missiles in it, put in there probably by Russia or Iran, and they are ready to unleash something on America one day soon. And it's a communist country. It's working with Russia and China and Venezuela to destroy the United States. I did an interview with Mr. Diaz, who was the chief of air staff of Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez. And what Mr. Diaz told me was, he said, Hugo Chavez is a communist. He wants to destroy the United States. And he is plotting in the future to bring the United States down and to create a communist bloc in the Western Hemisphere. This is not benign. This Venezuelan beachhead coming, and they've occupied, really, if you talk to regular Venezuelans, they are occupying Venezuela. They've
Yeah.
taken over and they've suppressed. Venezuela was one of the most promising, prosperous democracies in the Western Hemisphere, and it's been this horrible dictatorship for the last quarter of a century, thanks to these people. I mean, rather than invading Iraq, where they didn't really appreciate being freed from Saddam Hussein as much as we'd hoped they were, believe me, the Venezuelans would love to have their freedom.
Yeah. And so we're gonna see, we're gonna see the propaganda war increasing, right? We're gonna see these stories being told about what's happening in Venezuela and what's going to happen in Iran and what's going to happen in all these other places. I mean, right now with this guy in Chile, for example, now people are making a big deal about his his family past, right? So they say,
Oh yeah, his father was a lieutenant in one of the armies in World War II.
yeah, big
Like he
deal, right?
had any choice, right? Like he had any choice to fight, but to fight for his country.
Right, but so
Yeah.
now, yeah, Jose Antonio Cast is the youngest of 10 children in a family of German immigrants. His father fought at the front, and from 1942, so it's fairly late, was a member of the Nazi Party. Michael Kast's party membership card has survived, which is why any attempts.
Well, what is the last name? How do you spell it?
Kast.
Kust?
No, Kast. Kast.
Oh,
The vowels are
okay, yeah.
short and sharp. German usually is sometimes different, but usually very short and sharp. And so they say after the war, Michael Kast destroyed his officer's identification and in 1950 fled along the so-called Red Line using forged Red Cross documents, first to Argentina and then Chile. Okay, so
Was he Wehrmacht? Was he SS or Wehrmacht?
well, they say Wehrmacht, which is kind of like the most basic thing
Yeah, right.
you
But he
could.
was a communist. I mean, sorry, he was a Nazi Party member. He was
Yeah, but he became a member in 1942, which is like super late. I mean, he was not like
during
one
the
of the
middle of the
original
war.
guys. He was not like one
And
of the
what was
original guys from the 20s.
Well, I mean, he must have been in his 20s. He must have been a kid practically.
Okay, so there's actually there's a Wikipedia page. Maybe I can show this up on the screen here. They have it in
Yeah.
German language. Oh, and they also have an English one, but maybe the German one is longer. Maybe you can just translate it on the fly here. So let me just
Yeah.
select this thing here and then show it up here on the screen. So here we have Michael Kast
Oh,
Schindele.
he's just a kid. He's a baby. Look at him.
Wow, this is him in
Yeah.
1944. He looks
That's
like
his father.
15. He looks like, yeah, that's the
Yeah,
father. He looks like,
Hitler Jugend.
yeah, he was born in 1924. So he was
Oh, good grief.
20, but he was probably
20
very
years
underfed. He does look like a
Maybe
20-year-old.
19. Maybe only 19. His birthday hadn't come up yet, right?
Yeah. So yeah,
Birthday.
so he was like a 20-year-old in 1944. And so when they say he became a party member in 42, that means he became a party member
Oh, probably
18.
because he was in the Hitler Youth. They were pushing that, probably.
So at 18, he became a party member. All right. So he was born in. So that's the father of the new president in Chile. Just so people don't get confused. That's a father. He was pretty young and very, very young in World War II. Very normal for the time here. He was born in Bavaria. That's where I'm from. That's where I'm at right now. He was in Bavaria. Blah, 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 blah. He was member of the Hitler Jugend.
Yes, of course.
And then when he was an adult, he was accepted as a party member, which is more like a formality than anything else. Then he was called into the Wehrmacht. And so, he was like from a small place, and all the men that were sent to war, only a few of them survived. Fought in France. the Crimean theater, and
Hmm.
some other places. And then at some point, he
Well,
got.
was he just a regular infantryman?
Yeah, it seems like it. Hang on a second.
Yeah. Doesn't look.
Garrison, blah blah
Yeah.
blah. Yeah, just
Senior
standard. I think
lieutenant.
standard infantry. That's what it sounds like here.
Yeah.
Oh, it was captured by an American unit. He was
He
captured.
was captured
He was
in
captured
France.
briefly by an American unit, but yeah, he was captured again. Blah blah blah. It's
So he
very
escaped.
normal story. It's a very normal
Yeah.
story, and then they kind of emigrated to Chile and whatnot.
So what was his life in Chile? That's interesting.
Well, I think this is the most important part. He was kind of involved in the Pinochet dictatorship of the Pinochet era.
Did he work
The
for security services or the
Yeah,
army?
secret police. This is kind of
Ah,
alleged. We don't know for sure. So he was supposed to have worked for the Chile secret police.
yeah, the
Blah blah
secret
blah.
police, Geheimpolizei.
Exactly. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, well, what do you expect? I mean, what do you expected the communists to do because they wanted to take over the place as well, and they
Yeah, they
played
were. You
dirty.
had Allende. Yeah, you had Allende, and they're trying
Yeah.
to take over the country. He
And
was elected with
if people don't
plurality.
understand how the communists did this, the communists recruited people from all over the place, right? They would go into a target country, recruit people from there, people that had even mental disorders, who were very psychopathic and very aggressive and very revolutionary minded, but they would also recruit people from other places and then bring them to the target country. So
Hmm.
or you recruit from the target country, then bring him for a time to another place where there's
Like
like special
Cuba.
training, civil war, blowing people up, massacres,
Yeah.
and then bring him back when he's trained in revolutionary warfare. So this is an example that we can see. Okay, so
So
yeah,
has he been? Has this guy's father been associated with any of the? I think there were like 5,000 people tortured and some of them murdered under Pinochet after the fall of the President Allende.
was it this Condor stuff, the or something like it, or the
Well, and I think some people say they killed 5,000 people. They purged 5,000 communists. But
yeah, the
and I don't know what the
desaparecidos, the people who got disappeared and all that. Well, the
right. They disappeared him. They threw him out of helicopters. They tortured him to death. Blah blah blah. You know, I don't know to what extent the communists typically exaggerate these kind of things, but you got to remember what happened in Chile. You know, this is often misrepresented. When Allende became president, they there were people in the CIA who were alarmed, and we actually we the CIA tried to tell the Chilean military, you need to overthrow this guy, and the Chilean military said no. He's as long as he sticks by the Constitution, he's the legally elected president. We're not going to overthrow him. In fact, the CIA even kidnapped. It was a Chilean colonel or general who died after being chloroformed in the trunk of a car. They were kidnapping him to Argentina, where they were going to. I don't know what they were going to do. The CIA does so many stupid things. They wanted to get the generals to go move against this guy. They wouldn't do it. Why the generals moved on their own? This they wouldn't do it because we said so. And Henry Kissinger was scornful of any attempt to overthrow Allende. Famously, Henry Kissinger said, "Oh yeah, Chile,
mm,
that strategic country, like a dagger aiming at Antarctica." I mean, it's just about geographically the least important country in the world for in terms of the Cold War strategy, in terms of its geography.
yeah,
But what happened is Allende started to form his own army, creating his own militia the way Hugo Chavez did with his Bolivarians, creating your own brown shirt army, so to speak, like the SA was in Germany for the Nazis. And as soon as he did that, that was a violation of the Constitution, and the army acted against him. And furthermore, I don't know if you remember this, but it came out when some files came out that Allende, who supposedly committed suicide as they were closing in on him, there was a story that his Cuban advisor murdered him because they didn't want him captured
because he had
and blabbing
secrets.
about.
Yeah,
He had secrets about what the communists had been up to in Chile, and the Cubans didn't want him to be captured with that knowledge. They didn't trust him. So that's a very interesting detail, and I happen to think that detail is possibly true and should be looked at. And you have other things similar. Look at these rumors that Lula has betrayed Maduro and was part of the betrayal, allowing us to arrest Maduro. That Lula has sided with Trump. That Lula is desperate himself to survive in power, and that the Chinese see it as a betrayal. At least the Chinese are acting as though they see it as a betrayal. China has levied a, it's weird, people are making a big deal of this, that China has levied a tariff on Brazilian beef as if as if Chinese are big beef eaters. They're pork eaters, they're not beef
Mm.
eaters, supposedly to protect the Chinese cattle industry. I don't know what that means. Brazilian beef is not. I don't understand it, but supposedly China is organizing against internally in Brazil against Lula now. If that's true, Lula's days are numbered because the Chinese have tremendous resources in China. But I think it's all just a game to preserve Lula's position. But Maduro being here's something about Maduro being taken by the Americans. America has this tremendous tactical ability to carry out these amazing operations, but they have no strategic meaning. You've arrested the president of the country. All right, there's a new communist president of the country. He is still beholden to Russia. The Russian and Chinese troops and the IRCG troops are still in Venezuela. The missiles are still in Venezuela. The whole buildup of Venezuela as a fortress of communism is still there. The oil is still in the hands of the Chinese and Cubans who control Venezuela. What does this mean? So we announce some glorious victory and everyone's congratulating. Where's the freedom for the Venezuelan people? Where is the relief of the hemisphere from this monstrous Chinese incursion?
Yeah, but I think
I
this
don't
is when
see it
the
yet.
this is when the the allocation dynamic I think is at play here because as I said, and I posted a video about this on my channel. Everybody has to check his own resources. How much do I have? Where do I put my resources? Where, when, how much? And so, if you look at this Venezuelan situation now, it becomes more expensive to fix for the Russians. It becomes more expensive to fix for the Chinese, and they kidnapped this guy Nicolas Maduro who was a bus driver initially. He was starting out as a bus driver, they say. Who knows what special training he got,
A
what he's really
typical
like.
communist cadre, by
But
the
yeah,
way.
yeah. So don't never underestimate these people because they will always falsify their own history. We saw that with the initial Soviets. They will always say, "Oh, I had this most humble background. I was,
Yeah,
worker."
I'm a proletarian. I'm just
Yeah,
a
total
worker.
proletarian. I wasn't trained by these, madmen to be a professional at this. Yeah, I'm just one of the people, right? But when they grabbed this guy, and apparently there was a warning beforehand. This is when Trump gave out a warning, step down, when Maduro wouldn't budge. But now it wasn't a bluff. The Americans, they actually followed through with this. So it has a chilling effect. And it changes the dynamics for a lot of other people in Venezuela. It changes the cost, issue, allocation issue. So some people are more willing to turn against the regime in Venezuela. Some people are now more willing to be bought by the Americans, or maybe they always wanted to be bought by the Americans, but now is the opportunity because you spend enough time in a communist regime. I mean, it's terrible, and so now it's easier to buy people, I think, than it was before, and it's more expensive for the Russians to keep buying people, and more expensive for the Chinese to keep buying people.
They're running out of money, those guys.
Yeah, they're running out of money, and it's like okay, how many fires can you put out at the same time? How much money can you spend in Iran and in Venezuela and for the Arctic and this, that, in Ukraine and this, that, and the other? Eventually, you're gonna run out of other people's money, as I think
Overstretch,
that
overstretch.
Thatcher said about socialism. You run out of other people's money. What do? So we see this allocation, this allocation logic. at play. I think American intelligence has learned a lot since the Cold War, and also I would like to stress that when people now make these very amateurish comparisons, like don't get involved, it's going to be like Afghanistan. That was a quarter a century ago, basically. That was almost a quarter of a century ago. I distantly remember 9/11 and the war in Afghanistan. Things have changed, and espionage has changed, and the cost of espionage has changed, and running operations and the digital tracing and all that. Things have changed, and I think the Americans they've done a better job. I think they obfuscated that. They didn't want to show their cards. I mean, they used Trump, I think, to make it seem like everybody's just making things up as they go along, and it's not meant to be seen fully. It's not meant to be fully understood, and that's why
Well,
as
there's another
professionals, we
thing.
have to make people see as much as possible about this.
There's another thing that when I interviewed Mr. Wang of Luda Media, and he had earlier in the year when Trump first came into office, the Chinese thought, well, Trump, we've got Trump. He just thinks he's a big negotiator and he likes to be unpredictable, but he's not so unpredictable to us. Well, they believed that they had enough spies and agents around Trump that they could basically manipulate him. And what Mr. Wang told me here in my latest interview with him is he said that they're disappointed in their agents, and that Mr. Rubio, the Secretary of State and acting National Security Advisor, of Cuban descent, right, Mr. Rubio, has basically got control of policy, contrary to the wishes of China. And Mr. Rubio, as Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, has steered everything into this Caribbean thing, into this arrest of Maduro. And one has to wonder if Mr. Rubio wants to liberate Cuba, his mother country, whether he wants to get revenge on the communists throughout the Caribbean basin, that is, uprooting them out of Nicaragua and Venezuela. Is this Rubio? Is he the guy that's really the architect of this? Um, or is it somebody in the CIA or Pentagon who's the architect of this? I don't know. Destabilizing countries and having dictatorships fall, it's not an easy thing. We failed at the Bay of Pigs, excuse me, in 1961 under President Kennedy. The Cuban Missile Crisis, we basically let go of the Monroe Doctrine in the case of Cuba, which was, I think, a mistake. But now there's a reassertion of that. We've seen the Chinese Hutchison Whampoa Company driven out of control of the ports of entry in the canal, where there's really a big move afoot to remove China's key points of control in the Caribbean. And China has been building up a position in the Caribbean, by the way. Big container port there in the Caribbean, big investment in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, and Cuba, a lot of intelligence infrastructure of the Chinese in Cuba. Um, is this going to be rolled back? And this has implications for the Chinese presence in Brazil, Chinese presence also in Peru, where they're building what is going to be the biggest port in South America. They're dredging out this place and making it into this huge port, which plugs South America directly into China. Are we going to break that up as well? I hope so. I hope we will, and I hope that this is a low intensity warfare method of breaking it up where you don't have to lose American troops and you don't have to have the messiness of an invasion. But I'm skeptical. Just like I'm skeptical about the rising in Iran being supported by the U.S. Trump now says verbally
Yeah.
he's going to support it. Yeah.
Before we saw this almost alliance for a while between the left and the truthers. If people don't remember, actually, in the Bush years, the Bush era, the 2000s, this was when the left was what the left was saying and what the truthers, the traditional traditional conspiracy influencers were saying was almost the same, about 9/11 and war for oil and American imperialism, and it was just some differences, right? The left had its interpretation of the international capitalist pig imperialist, as the main enemy, and the truthers, the conspiracy buffs, they had a variation of that, which was like the international Jewish conspiracy, imperial thing, right? So one side had the Jew thing in it, the other didn't, at least not overtly, but they were kind of alike. And so when we saw all this, the regime change go sideways, it didn't really work out as well in Iraq. It didn't really work out that well in Afghanistan. And people complain about, how much money it cost and that it wasn't a success. But we also saw a lot of studies that came out since then from various places, especially also military studies, that pointed out that all of this, nation building effort, all these efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan, all of that was subverted. All of that was heavily subverted by Iran, which and Iran is a proxy of Russia. And so it could have worked. It could have worked in theory.
Russia and China were also helping the Taliban.
Yeah, so it's not like you can make these comparisons like oranges and apples and say, oh, this shouldn't be like that. I mean, first of all, that was quarter of a century ago, and the other thing is, you should discuss all the pieces, all the moving pieces that were at play back then. I mean, there are various different reasons that it failed, that we didn't see, let's say, a repetition of what happened here in Germany or Western Germany after World War II. I mean, we were a raging fascist nation. We were cult members. We were full on in the cult. We were all in. And then it turned out we could also be, peaceful. We could also be productive and peaceful and very normal, right? So it's like it could have worked in Iraq. It could have worked in Afghanistan. But there's different reasons it failed. And one reason was Iran. One reason was the Russians and the Chinese. And also another reason was the moles, the traitors, the traitors in the West that had also blinded American intelligence before 9/11. I mean, that's been shown pretty clearly, when was it Aldrich Ames and some of the others, and then they had to rebuild a lot of these operations. They were kind of blind. Intelligence was kind of blind for a while. They had to manage the fallout of these traitors being exposed. Internal traitors, FBI, high-ranking FBI traitors, subverting counterintelligence, and also these traitors that betrayed foreign operations. And then 9/11 happened. And then we saw a subversion of the effort in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I remember at the time when Vladimir Putin was playing this strategic public game, right? Putin at the time, he wanted to appear compatible to the West. He wanted these concessions. He wanted everybody to forgive what he was doing in Russia, just killing everybody's freedom, just grabbing all the money, just totally destroying every bit of progress in Russia. And he had this offer to make. I'm gonna help along the Bush administration. I'm gonna, that's what Putin did overtly at the time. I'm gonna get the American military some indirect help, and we're gonna do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, because Putin said we also have a problem with radical Islam. The Chechens in the Moscow, these apartment bombings, which were a total false flag of the FSB. And the Russians, Putin even had his own bin Laden type, this Shamil Basayev guy, who also had the camo jacket on in all his propaganda videos and the Kalashnikov rifle.
Way, he had been a GRU officer.
Yeah, exactly. And so with the Kalashnikov in the background and stuff. So Putin said, I'm a bit like George Bush, we're like the cowboys. We're the cowboy types. yeah, we're like both like cowboy types. We like the cowboy stuff, and we fight these Muslim terrorists. And so I'm helping the Americans, but I want something in return. But then Putin was subverting the American effort any way he could, especially through Iran. So please, out there, don't compare apples to oranges and say, oh, we shouldn't get involved in Venezuela, we shouldn't get involved in Iran because of, a quarter century ago what was going on with Afghanistan and Iraq. It's way more different than that. It's way more difficult than that. Now, here is a thing from the current media blitz. It says China intends to keep playing in the U.S.'s backyard, Latin America. The Trump administration took veiled swipes at China in its national security strategy with the vow to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere and deny non-hemispheric competitors. Beijing issued a little notice policy paper on Latin America and the Caribbean that geopolitical analysts say foreshadows more US-China jostling for regional influence. China has always stood in solidarity through thick and thin with the global south, meaning fellow communist comrades, including Latin America and the Caribbean, said the 6,700-word policy paper, China's first on the region in almost a decade. All this blah, blah, blah. China shadows each major challenge President Trump has taken on in Latin America, from degrading the Venezuelan regime to reasserting American dominance at the Panama Canal, on and on and on. Beijing now claims 24 signatories in the region to its Belt and Road Initiative, compared with none before in 2017. It has also displaced the US as the biggest trading partner with many Latin American countries. China's strategy is basically not giving an inch, said Reinberg, a co-author of the CSIS analysis. So hang on a second. Explain that to me, Jeff, how that works. The left in America and the left in America and the left in Europe has been telling us that we should buy Chinese products and we should sell to China because we get cheap products, and that's good. But somehow we're giving the Chinese a bunch of money, and so they can subsidize a lot of products, which they can then sell basically at a loss to these other places to try to dominate them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
is the left that stupid, or are they just that devious? I mean, the average leftist who says, "Oh, we should trade with China, we should buy their cheap crap," and only a fascist would implement tariffs. Only a fascist like President Trump would implement tariffs on Chinese goods. I mean, come on.
Most people left and right just follow an ideology. They just follow a narrative, and they are just the dupes of that narrative. They don't think for themselves. So these narratives were designed where? They were designed in China. They were designed in Russia. They were designed by think tanks. And then they propagated and people repeat it here and it becomes policy. And then we have an open border and we have massive trade with China, and China infiltrates Canada and Mexico and the United States, and they take over Venezuela, and they're supporting Cuba, and Daniel Ortega comes back to power in Nicaragua, and they're controlling Peru, and they're dominating Brazil. I mean, come on, it goes on. And we sit here with this total incomprehension, not realizing that we're being surrounded. And here the Russians complain, you're surrounding us. You've got, NATO's got this evil strategy against us. But the United States is the one being surrounded. When I went to Canada last year, one of the leading Canadian conservative politicians sat next to me at dinner and said the Chinese have taken over this country, as she told me.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
which is what Trump said.
Sidewinder report. Look it up. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just, look, we do have to combat that. General Laura Richardson said this when she was head of Southern Command. She said Russia and China are taking over Latin America, and we need to do something about it. Well, the Biden administration did zip nothing. So now
Yeah.
Trump is actually doing something, but I hope it's not a nothing. Arresting Maduro and charging him with drug trafficking and attacking a bunch of drug boats. It's not exactly a confrontation with communism. It's as if you got to read Joe Douglas's book, Red Cocaine. It says, look, it's the communists, stupid, behind the whole drug thing. That's their weapon for taking over countries and compromising people and using money laundering to get into financial institutions and to What
Oh
do
yeah,
they think's been going
and
on?
of course, because of all the traitors, because of all the moles, especially moles inside the CIA. Every time the CIA does something, that they shouldn't be doing, like smuggling a bit of cocaine, a few tons here, a few tons there to fund something that's an
Come to find
anti-communist
out that
operation.
these guys were recruited to be agents
Yeah,
of
but then they
Cuba
get
or
caught,
China,
and
and they did that.
The CIA gets caught, and then the left has a field day, and they want to just use that forever and say it's always the CIA that does everything,
Yeah,
right? And then they are
yeah.
behind everything. But it's like here's this other thing. It says here Chinese research submarines for the first time traveled thousands of feet beneath the Arctic ice this summer, a technical feat with chilling military and commercial implications for America and its allies. U.S. national security officials say the Chinese undersea expeditions offer fresh evidence of a growing threat from China in the Arctic region known as the High North. It's this giant bowl where you have Russia and Canada and the U.S. and Europe and Northern Europe, Scandinavia. For China, mastery of Arctic travel could yield valuable data about the natural resources awaiting below melting ice caps, significantly reduce travel time for commercial shipping, and position nuclear-armed submarines closer to potential targets, including the U.S. The Chinese are being more and more aggressive across the High North, said U.S. Air Force General Alexis Grinkovich, top military leader of North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Chinese vessels on research missions often give cover to military purposes. China declared itself a near Arctic power.
That's so ridiculous.
Yeah, so
China's not in the Arctic Circle at all. It's nowhere near the Arctic.
yeah, but it's near.
Near? Well, we could say we're near to the moon because
We
we're
are.
nearer to the moon than Mars, but we're not really
We
near the
we
moon.
are near to the moon.
Near, near. Yeah, it's just it's so near we could walk there. If someone could walk to the Arctic Circle from China in one day, then I'd say they're near.
Yeah, and so so I think for a long time, generations, we've seen like these moves and counter moves that between the East and the West, and they try to mess up the other side's allocation. Because if you want to run a system, if you want to have order, it's about allocation of your resources. So you always want to have perfect allocation if possible, or the best possible allocation, and you want your enemy to have the worst possible allocation. You want the enemy to misallocate his resources. And so this, when the in the Cold War, when the Soviets they tried all kinds of things, with their resources, taking over in Korea and Vietnam and different places, and getting involved in our territories here in the West. And a lot of that game was trying to misallocate. So this is where your social democrats come in. This is when the Democratic Party comes in, and they say, we want to protect the workers' rights. We want to protect this group and that little group and that little group. And it's all about wasting money. And we want to have new laws protecting everything. And suddenly it's just the productivity goes down, costs go sky high. It becomes just everything becomes a straitjacket for everyone, and it's hard to make money. It's hard to have a surplus. And so this was like the communist strategy for a while, but then ultimately, the communists they couldn't allocate their limited resources as well, and the total resources were not enough. So they kind of pretended that the USSR was over, and then they launched the communists. They kind of launched this. Another strategy against the West to get the West to misallocate, especially with 9/11. I mean, I've told the story before. Some of the leading 9/11 terrorists, before they came to America, they had actually spent time in Germany, the country where I'm at now, in the city of Hamburg, and there was like a whole bunch of
Yes.
Hamburg, and there was like this one apartment where I think 20 or more terrorists, extremists, this one apartment they had listed at their place of residence, right? So they're all bunched up all the time in this one apartment, plotting stuff. Nothing really happened, even though foreign intelligence services had warned about them. The French and, even further away, they all warned about these guys who were coming to Germany, who were studying in Hamburg, these universities, and they were visiting radical mosques. And, it would have been fairly easy to spy on them and place a single solitary bug into listening device into this one apartment. This could have prevented 9/11, but this was not done. And guess who was responsible for security guess who was responsible for the security in the city of Hamburg at the time? The left wing party, the social democrats. They had control over the city. They were responsible for security, and the guy who was personally mainly responsible, he became chancellor. He was our chancellor up until kind of recently. He was chancellor not too long ago. So it's like 9/11 happened. Then the U.S. was trying to do its thing. Change the environment over there in Afghanistan and Iraq. Tried to nation build. This was subverted. This was sabotaged through Iran, and Iran was a proxy of Russia. This was subverted all over the place to get the U.S. to get America to misallocate its resources. So a lot of misallocation, a lot of national debt, a lot of problems, right? But now it kind of works the other way too, to a larger degree. We see a lot of misallocation from the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians. They're going broke, right? Now in Iran, we have this. The rial, Iran's currency, has slumped to a historic low against the dollar. Students joined in protests, again, waves of protests, leaving the Iranian government on the brink of what could become another crackdown. President Trump entered the fray Friday, saying on Truth Social that the U.S. would come to the protesters' aid if more were killed, though he didn't say how. And it's about the nuclear program. Iran has suffered from years of economic mismanagement. The hardline Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps controls much of the economy, much of the government's budget outlays. Corruption, all over. 1 in 4 of the youth are unemployed. Water shortages, cash strapped. So this is like when people have no choice anymore but to rebel. If there's water shortage, don't have jobs, don't have food, don't have money, it's time to rebel, right? And it's like it's like a deal that's being proposed by Trump and the people around Trump, the system behind Trump. They're proposing a deal. We can do this a hard way, we can do this a softer way, or a medium hard way. Just like boiling an egg. How hard do you want the egg to be? This is like, it's about misallocation. The enemy is heavily misallocating right now, and it's a major factor. Now, of course, there's a factor that doesn't directly involve money at all, and this is how sharp the populations are, how much they understand. Do they learn the right things? Do they learn how this all works? This is even independent from this money allocation dynamic. It's winning and losing. It's not just a question of how many resources you have and where you put them at what time. It's about the population itself. Do they fall for communist ideas? Do they fall for other stupid ideas? Or do they start to get it? Right? I was kind of a little bit surprised to see that Chevron is still big in Venezuela. They trying to keep that door open.
Well, they made a deal recently to try to get back in there, because you had a bunch of oil executives that were actually held hostage there in Venezuela.
Oh, great.
I spoke to a guy who was wanting to negotiate their release some years ago. He wanted my help somehow in connecting with somebody to do that. Well, he wanted to talk to Bolsonaro actually when Bolsonaro was president, and somebody knew that I knew Bolsonaro, and he called me up, and it was like, uh, what was this going to do? You're going to get a new deal with Venezuela? You don't deal with those people. They take executives hostage.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
And there's more stuff happening. There's more stuff happening. Like it all ties together. Here's a story: asylum not found. Why Russians are being deported from the United States. In early December, the Trump administration sent a fourth plane load of deportees back to Moscow. Russians currently in the United States are increasingly encountering refusals of their requests for political asylum, and the White House has announced that the government is suspending decisions on such applications. These steps are part of a broader trend toward tightening the asylum system, and on and on and on. So this is like, so they don't want to take the risk, right? They don't want to have the costs of watching these people because they could be spies. They could work against American security, right? So it's cost allocation. Okay, you get a migrant or a refugee. What is this person going to cost you, especially if you have security on your mind? So you don't want that cost. And then we got this story here. Tesla wants its American cars to be built without any Chinese parts. So now we saw that the Chinese car manufacturer BYD is selling a lot of vehicles, and they want to be cheaper than everybody else, and they kind of they want to look like cars from another country, and yeah, so now it's bye-bye, I guess, when it comes to Tesla. Tesla relying on Chinese goods for the car batteries. So this was also a huge bit of leverage which the Chinese had, and I think they seem to be losing it. It says earlier this year, the electric vehicle maker decided that it would stop using China-based suppliers for Tesla cars that are made in the US. Tesla and its suppliers have already replaced some China-made components with parts made elsewhere. Tesla is aiming to switch all other components to those made outside of China in the next year or two, some of the people said. Yeah, chips and batteries. Chips and batteries, they say. So this is a decoupling of the world's largest economies and the global supply chains. Definitely. So, yeah, we're going to see more examples. Definitely more examples of that. And so when China loses leverage, that means they're misallocating more, or they're having more trouble allocating their resources, because a lever means you get something out of something. You get into the you get out of the red, you get into the surplus zone, and sometimes a lever can be very strong. You can get a lot more out of it than you put into it, but when you lose that lever, you lose a lot. And sometimes a lever can become a lever against you. So now you have to beg people to buy your cars, or you have to charge more realistic prices for your cars, or you can't sell those cars anymore to the outside world because they don't want it, or they're tariffs. People are not allowed to buy them. And what do you do then, right? How do you sell these Chinese cars? Or how do you sell Chinese batteries when Tesla is not using them anymore? So there's major things happening everywhere. Here's another story. I want to get your take on this. This is from a few weeks ago. Marjorie Taylor Greene to resign from Congress. Who would have thought?
Good riddance.
Who would have thought?
Well, yeah, there's some kind of scandal that is hanging over her head for her to do that. And of course, she's a kind of scandalous person. So there's the stories about her. So it's like, it's not too surprising. She's very volatile. She has very strange opinions. She doesn't really belong in Congress. She's one of the useless people. She believes things that are completely crazy and she's irresponsible. So it's a good that she's going.
Yeah, so this is like all these stories that show us that things are actually moving, and maybe I want to get to this piece right now. This is a piece. Maybe I can put this up on the screen here and get your take on this. This would definitely be a good idea. Let me select this here real quick and cut. So this is the piece on my website, candorintel.com, calculating how Trump may have been used to fool Russia into a false sense of opportunity. So for many months, we have observed a rerun of the same soap opera. The Trump admin professes to be tired of the war in Ukraine, indicates a willingness to accept a peace plan which heavily favors Russia. The media picks up this thread and insinuates either that Trump is a Russian asset, or definitely a Russian asset, or at least shares an ultra-right-wing ideological basis with the Kremlin. Then the peace plan does not really happen because the US administration really wants to draw a hard line, secure what's left of Ukraine, and wait for the Russian economy to collapse so that Moscow will ultimately sell its conquered Ukrainian territories back to Kiev down the line. Kind of a repetition of the Cold War strategy. Before such peace talks, we actually see reports about new US weapon deliveries to Ukraine and allowing long-range missile attacks deep into Russian territory. While the media still cries treason over some public statements from the Trump admin, the European countries announce they want to take matters into their own hands and keep funding the Ukrainian war effort and come up with a different peace plan that favors Ukraine. Every professional already knows full well the US cannot defend the whole world at the same time, and thus the US will have to focus on China while the EU focuses on Russia. It's a division of tasks, not some fundamental disagreement in the West. So this theater repeats every few months, and things have not been going well for the Russian regime, wasting numbers of soldiers and military goods, and so things did not go as planned for Russia. You know, they wanted to take Ukraine in a blitzkrieg. Things did not go as planned. How did the Russians miscalculate so badly despite their considerable intelligence expertise and penetration of the West? So here's a thought experiment, and there's different sub variations of that scenario. So, for example, there's this scenario. American services or a tight, small interagency group cultivated Donald Trump for years as a perception asset to give Moscow a false sense of political opportunity, thereby encouraging Russian strategic misallocation. Now, the hard claim, the more extreme version, would be Trump as some kind of a targeted double agent. You know, he got himself compromised on purpose, so the Russians think they control him, but they really don't. Now, there's all kinds of different sub-variations of that. Now, the most likely would be the soft form, a perception agent, sort of cultivating Donald without him understanding really what's going on, and using Trump along as some other people, using them to fool Russia and to make Russia misallocate resources and screw up timing. And so then I get into the whole details of this, you know, how difficult it is to pull something like this off, you know, just to cultivate Trump and keep it tight, keep the secret really close so the Russians don't figure it out despite their whole, you know, intelligence penetration of the West. So here's a discussion of what would have to be true for the Trump as deception model to hold, how tough it is to do, what the record actually shows, and could Russia have misread the situation anyway without any major U.S. deceptions? So what do you think about some dangerous games that may have been played? Because I think there had been much better ideas, or there were better options over the last few decades since 1991. So you think there was some funny games there?
Funny games
I'm being
in
sarcastic, of course.
regard, well, there's so much going on, it's hard to know what it, a lot of times, like in the Cold War, we will have suspicions, we'll suspect certain things went on, then we're going to find out later what really went on. That's what we're going to find out. um, but in this situation, I think that the U.S. is usually blamed for things that they didn't really do, like the Euromaidan revolution in Ukraine. That wasn't a U.S. operation. That's nonsense. There's no evidence for that. Um, uh, of course, the regime change that brought the Shah to power back in the early 1950s, that was the U.S.'s doing, and we have the history of that. Um, uh, so and the U.S. is always very slow to realize who their friends and enemies are. Right? So many people in the State Department welcome Castro as kind of, well, he's going to be a better leader than Batista. Um, People were slow to recognize how bad Hugo Chavez was, or how really bad Lula da Silva is. For Trump to be flirting with Lula da Silva, I think, is a mistake. So the idea that the U.S. in its operations, the U.S. has all these capabilities. I mean, we had the capability to invade Iraq. In the first Gulf War, we didn't do it. What was it? Trump Powell said, "Well, if you own it, you have to, and you break it, you have to fix it." So they just basically contained Saddam, and then when they invaded it, they ended up in this mess, which cost trillions of dollars. And Afghanistan state building and occupation ended up costing. But of course, how much were the Russians and Chinese and the Iranians pouring into there? And we were subverted from the beginning. I mean, you do realize that Hamid Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, basically said that his defense minister, Mohammed Fahim, was a Russian agent, and that Russia
Yeah.
was really getting the benefits of our occupation of Afghanistan. Um, the complexities are so massive, and the mistakes that the Americans have made, for all our capacities, it seems we're a giant with feet of clay. And but maybe the better, more apt thing is that we're kind of blind. I don't see how, or they're serious. Everybody I've talked to, a lot of military people, no, this can't be about drug trafficking. I mean, then why aren't we doing this to Mexico? Mexico's got the biggest drug cartels and the biggest movement of drugs over the U.S. border of anybody. And of course, it's all, red cocaine. And this is all part of the communist system of organized crime and drug trafficking, and the communists and the Russia especially being plugged into the international organized crime and being the dominant partner in all these crime syndicates. I mean, you've got the three major Italian mafias years ago. The head of the Italian Parliamentary Committee of Inquiry into the Mafia said Russia is the capital of international organized crime. They're basically
Mm.
directing the three major Italian mafias. We never, and for us to go after Maduro, well, fine, but this isn't strategic to arrest one person. And even if there have been many protests where Venezuelan regime was close to falling, just like the Iranian regime now, there's protests. And they say, well, they're on the brink of collapse, but they haven't collapsed yet. But it would just take a little bitty push. Just maybe with a
Mm.
feather, we could knock over Iran, we could knock over Venezuela at those moments, and we didn't do it. So we have assembled a huge military force. More than a third of the U.S. military is now in the Caribbean, and it's all just to arrest one guy. I mean, really? I'm sorry, but that's an abomination in terms of
Yeah, but it
strategic
wouldn't it
deployment.
be? I
Taking
mean,
them
wouldn't
out
it
of Europe,
be?
taking them out of the Far East,
Yeah,
and you've put them here, and you're not accomplishing anything but arresting one man and his wife.
I
I'm
think.
sorry.
Yeah, but I think that maybe there's something else that is making the U.S. government hesitating on that, and that is and that is of these millions and millions and millions of illegal immigrants, Latinos in the U.S. I mean, fully illegal, kind of being on the fence legally, or being getting amnesty or whatever. There's millions of these people
They're
in
being
it,
defended by the governments,
yeah,
local
in
governments,
America
Illinois,
right now.
Chicago, California. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like a civil war. There's
there's
a lot
millions of
of
these people, and if you get involved too quickly, too massively in Venezuela, you pull your forces to you put your bring your forces to Venezuela, that may make you vulnerable domestically if the signal is given for these Latinos to riot and to overthrow in the southern United States, right? I mean, because it is a big country. It is a big country, and it takes. I mean, it's not easy to conquer by just rifles and firebombs, because that's what the Second Amendment is for. It was a deterrence, so people couldn't just, like in Europe and other places for a long time, these people don't understand how this works, right? If you have a disarmed population, and you just call them up every few years for a stupid war and give them a basic training and not good weaponry, if your population is disarmed, an enemy can punch right in with a professional force. They can feint where they're gonna attack from different places, then create this encirclement, this enclosement, and they cut off parts of your country. They can walk right through, because the population can't do anything against an invading force if it's unarmed, and the government is too late at deploying forces. So it's kind of a thing, where do you allocate your forces? Where do you deploy your forces to when you got this ticking time bomb at home? Just like we got a ticking time bomb in Europe in the form of a ticking time bomb in Europe in the form of communists and radical Muslims, and some crazy fascists who also want to overthrow everything and kiss up to daddy Tsar Putin. It's a ticking time bomb, and I think there's threats and counter threats when it comes to these things. And so it factors in when you make a decision what to do with Venezuela. Is it going to be a significant publicity stunt, or do you do more, but then the other side is going to pull something, pull a trick out of their hat and cause you some more damage, right? I mean, I'm worried more about the southern United States than I'm worried about Venezuela. And
the southern. There's no threat of a Latino rebellion in the southern United States. You have the divide in America is between the left and the right over open borders and allowing anybody to come in here that wants to. And you've got many people in this country saying, basically, the Democratic Party, if you get 50 million illegal aliens and you integrate them and you make them into voters, they're going to vote Democrat, most of
yeah,
them.
exactly.
And the Democratic Party wants to have a permanent majority, and this is their part of their plan. And of course, socialist policies. It's easier to get these people who come here poor to be for a socialist hand. Of course, the government is approaching. We got more than 38 trillion in debt. I mean, we can't. Socialism, the welfare state doesn't work. It's we're going broke, and we have more debt now than we had as a percentage of our gross national product than we had at the end of World War II, when we had the highest debt we ever had, and that we mostly paid for by 1970, not entirely, but we grew out of it, and so what I don't understand is uh, in terms of all this, it is about the American elite absorbing Marxist or socialist kind of ideology, anti-nationalist, anti-American thinking that America's been this big bad boogeyman, and it's the fault of white people, especially white males. They're the ones that have oppressed women and Indians and black people and minorities, and so we have to oppress the white man so that everyone else can be free. This is the basic argument of the Communist Party USA, which has been transmitted to the Democratic Party. And the Republican Party is like, well, we don't want to say anything against women or minorities because, it's like you don't have to say anything against them. They're just trying to take over the country. You're going to let communists take over the country by using race and by appealing to the race resentments of people who've been discriminated against in the past. This is a strategy for
What do you
controlling
think?
the United States and bankrupting it.
What do you think about these? Some of these. These American, some of these American money families. They've been in business for a couple of generations, and they've passed on wealth, and
You
they
mean the
they
Rockefellers?
yeah, well, some of the which some of these people were called robber barons and whatnot, for making
Mhm.
money with the railway systems or car companies or oil companies, and they go from generation to generation, and they represent capitalism, but at some point, like you saw with the Rockefellers, at some point, kind of the last generation of them, the younger ones, they sort of, at least by judging from their words, they sort of became left wing because they say, I don't like my parents, I don't like my family history, I don't like oil, I love the environment, I love being left, I love spending my money, of course. But I have this left conscience now, blah blah blah, and sort of you see this sort of these families kind of falling apart in terms of their mindset, right? They're going from what they were originally, forming America's industrial power. Sure, it was a lot of centralized power invested with these trusts and the railways and the oil and the car industries, but as we said before on a show which we did, it built the foundation so America could outproduce. America could ultimately outproduce the Nazis, the Japanese, everybody. They could actually win wars because of production. But now we see all these Rockefellers, these younger Rockefellers, and these Rockefeller women. They put money into left wing eco causes, and they want to give
Yeah.
all the money away to left wing causes. I mean, what do you think about some of these American families, especially when some of them may have become tired of all this competition and innovating, and maybe they think maybe we should have a system that controls everything and who is working what and who's getting what money, and it's all centralized so we don't have to deal with all the stress that we've had for so long. What is going on with some of these American money families?
Well, when America has had real laissez-faire capitalism, when people could build whatever they wanted, and Congress was basically open for sale, um, uh, these brilliant people like John Rockefeller and the Harrimans and the DuPonts and the Morgans and all these people in the Morgan banking house, they built the country. H.L. Mencken made the point. He said, well, all these elites throughout all history, they were robbers, and they basically suppressed the people in these, going back to the ancient times. People who had money, they controlled everything, and they made sure that they kept control of everything. These aristocratic families, the plebeians and patricians, kind of thing in ancient Rome, for example. And you had aristocratic tradition. In America, we forget what happened in the early 20th century. They passed antitrust laws. They went after the octopus, they called it, because these families were cooperating with each other. And in the midst of these laws, what they did to destroy the aristocracy in Great Britain, for example, is they passed taxes. They just taxed the aristocracy out of existence. And this was as the emergence of what you'd call social democracy across the board really was beginning in the West, plebeian democracy. But the plutocrats, they developed a strategy. They created tax exempt foundations, harbors where they could save their money. Well, that money then to be used for charities and other things and political causes, it became controlled by managers, by political activists, and a lot of them tended to be on the left. And of course, their children did what? They went to universities. And what would they teaching at the universities? Well, it was Marxism had come into universities. So they were taught this, they were taught to be guilty. And of course, so Manhattan, a lot of the elite, they were dabbling with communist politics, giving money to left wing causes. It was just chic, right, to do that, and it's remained chic. So, but the real entrepreneurs in America, many of them, uh, tended to still be right wing. I mean, you've got Bill Gates is not an example because he ran off to China and got owned by them, as has been documented. But it's more and more as America becomes where corporations get set and the system locks everything in and there's less and less competition and it's more and more regulation by the government. You have a different kind of system which at first was characterized after this legislation by Joseph Schumpeter as oligopoly, right? Managed competition, I guess you could call it. And it has been advancing, and it was Schumpeter's argument that socialism was going to ultimately prevail in this mix. It was going to become more and more socialistic, and I think that's been borne out by what's happened. More and more government controls, and of course, but the problem is, and this is where Gustav Le Bon's analysis comes in. He says as you approach socialism, you approach absolute bankruptcy and everything will collapse. And Vilfredo Pareto, the Italian sociologist, said a similar thing. He described it as a circulation of elites. He said, look, the foxes and the lions. The lions, when your society is young, are bold and tell the truth and are willing to fight and get in your face. The foxes, they all running around behind everybody, making secret deals, trying to make everything work, and they basically end up stealing everything. It's the late Roman Empire. We're bribing the barbarians, right? This is the same thing that's happened to the West. We're trying to bribe China and Russia not into attacking
You
us.
try to solve every problem with money. You know, you
Money and
throw more
negotiations for
money at
control. Yeah,
throw more money at the problem. Yeah, and
right.
I think stupidity or stupid behavior, because there's a difference between your brain not functioning very well in and of itself and stupid behavior. I mean, we saw some really smart people with stupid behavior. We saw Albert Einstein sort of believing in socialism. We saw
Yeah, you wrote a book
smart
on it.
people like
It's
the
quite
Rosenbergs.
juvenile.
Yeah,
Yeah,
smart people like the Rosenbergs, very skilled technical geniuses, become convinced of communism and even dying for communism. It's just choosing the death penalty or whatever some of these traitors did. They would rather be be on the electric chair than to renounce socialism. So there's stupid behavior, and that will cost a ton of money ultimately. And it's like it can change the whole calculation. How people think. And I put up this.
well, I'll remind you of your countryman Oswald Spengler, who said that basically Caesarism breaks the dictature of money. And that is government power. Caesarism breaks the dictature of money and its political instrument, democracy. This is what Jacob Burckhardt and Nietzsche, who was a big influence on Oswald Spengler, they had analyzed that this all leads to the collapse of the republic, the collapse of capitalism in a huge turmoil. Uh, Basically, Vilfredo Pareto called it the spoliation, a great moment of spoliation where everything is stolen, everything is robbed. And then when the robbers get done exhausting everything, it's total collapse, like what you see in Iran, what China and Russia are headed to. And it was only the productivity of America because it was the most free economy that was keeping the world afloat. Once America stops being free, all the rest of the world, all those other economies are going
Everything
to go
will
down the
fall.
drain.
Yeah,
They
and
they
so
will they will collapse into cannibalism. Yes.
I posted this. Piece. It's kind of short and technical language here. It's called theoretical pie in the sky socialism versus the real socialist regime. And a major difference between the pie in the sky version of socialism, the fantasy version, and the real version. A big difference is how to form hierarchies and organize a group of people. Let's say in a company, you make something that is important, a product, right? That people depend on. You make electricity, or you make cars, or anything that medical equipment, anything that's really really needed. And so, how do you make these things? How do you, when you have like 100 people or 1,000 people, how do you form a council, a Soviet? You vote people into this council, and then you talk how to divide up the tasks, who does what, for what payment, and who makes the decisions, and who has to do a very demanding job, and who has maybe a more comfortable office job, and who's got a more dangerous job and who's got a less dangerous job, and la 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 la, right? And it's like, even when you can manage such a thing, when you just have this, socialist Soviet kind of council, and you vote people into this council and you divide up the roles, even if you come up with a plan, how long is it gonna last? How long until a group of people says, our job is really terrible. We have these toxic fumes, and we get work accidents, and we don't get paid enough. Why do we get less payment than the manager types or the more specialized people? And we don't really understand what they're doing, but why don't we get as much money? And so we want more money. And if we don't get more money, we'll vote somebody else in who gives us more money. And then you get like these fractions, and these people start to fight with each other. And then one group says, well, if we don't get our way, we're going to strike, because that's the communist way. We're going to not do anything. And the other group says, well, then we're going to strike too, so nobody gets any money. And if this is happening everywhere, everything is falling apart. And that's why there's always actual socialism, real world socialism, where you have like a classic structure, a very dictatorial system that will assign roles. They will tell you, you are qualified for this, so you will work that job. We'll tell you what you will be getting, and that's the end of it. And you cannot strike. If you rebel, we will squash you. If you talk about strike and rebellion, we will find out because of our snitches, and we will get you, and we will make an example out of you. And this is sort of like where reality then sets in, because to share things, you need to have things to share. If there's nothing really to share, everybody's just fighting for the scraps, you have nothing to share happily with each other and divide up all these things. And it's difficult to make things, complex goods, on scale, at scale, in a certain quality, and turn in a profit. So you end up with something that you can share. Instead of being in the red. And so this is kind of a piece that compares these two concepts, because sometimes, or very often, people confuse these two completely separate things. So they're one side is arguing, real socialism, the other side is arguing fantasy socialism, the pie in the sky.
I mean, it's Iran's is in economic collapse, which is brought about
Yeah.
these protests, which they say that they're on the brink of political collapse.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens, but this is what happens when revolutions occur: is you have a collapse within the country. This is in 1917 in Russia, when there wasn't enough food. Remember, during World War I, and the people in St. Petersburg were freezing and starving, and the troops came out and were ordered to shoot into the crowd that was causing trouble, and they joined the crowd. And then they brought larger units to go against the crowd, and they joined until whole armies were joining in the Russian Revolution. Whenever you have this kind of situation, you can have a complete collapse. In Ukraine, there wasn't a economic collapse, but the people were fed up, and the government's reaction to the people was, the people in Ukraine it was almost like a religious moment. They said, no, we're done. We're not taking the Soviet crap
Yeah.
anymore. We're not taking Moscow's puppets anymore. We want to be part of Europe. We don't want to be part of Russia.
Oh, and I
And
remember
this is
this.
where
Yeah,
it came
I
out of.
remember this one story. This was, I think, in a major news organization like Reuters or something. This was a story about an Iranian who volunteered to become a spy for the U.S. Unfortunately,
Reza Khalili?
no. Unfortunately, this was and this operation went south because of some technical things, tradecraft things, and so he was a guy who was running like a company. He was really good at electrical engineering stuff, I think it was. So he built this thing, and I think his parents has already started to build this thing. So this was like handcrafted, entrepreneurial, goodness, and he was really going places. And he wanted to not rock the boat. He wanted to exist in this structure and not cause friction, hoping for the best. But then these Iranian high-level people, they just stole his stuff. They said, okay, it's really cool what you built here. Now we take it from you, and we'll just give you a very minor role and very little pay, and we're just going to screw you over. And so then he started to contact, a proxy of U.S. intelligence, because he was allowed to travel due to his job. He was allowed to travel into more neutral countries, and so while in a neutral country, he would set up this computer method to send communications to American intelligence fronts, or and he would get an answer, and then they would set up a first meeting, and he became a full-on spy. He got on his motorcycle and he was racing around the desert in Iran, mapping the special electrical power grid system that was used for the Iranian nuclear program. And so he was handing that information over to American intelligence. And this is what happens when you treat people that way. They will work against you. And this is why you have the crackdowns and the total espionage in a communist system, because that's the only way they can sustain themselves. They can exist if they terrorize everybody and they spy on everybody.
Yeah. They have to make sure that people think that are so scared of being caught, and they want to also prove to people that it's impossible to go against the regime, that you will be caught, that you will be executed. And it's very hard in a society where people are watching you, where you're being spied on, where there's electronic surveillance, where as soon as they get a suspicion about you, they look at you, and they're going to find, if you're doing something wrong, they're going to find traces of it. It's impossible, especially today with the modern methods that they have. It's really hard. These people in Iran are very brave, by the way, going into the streets and calling for the mullahs to be out of power. This is extremely brave. Because these people's names, their faces appear on a camera, their voice is recognized by someone, they're going to be arrested, they're going to be tortured in prison.
Yeah, and it's important that these people in these countries, that they have something to look forward to, that they have realistic hope, that they get help from the outside. And by the way, this just in, we are going to run the country. Trump speaks on U.S. capture of Venezuela's Maduro. That's a bold statement. Wouldn't expect anything else from Trump.
We're going to run Venezuela?
Yeah, that's what he's saying. I don't know if he actually means that.
How do we do that exactly with the Venezuelan military and the Russians?
I don't know. He said President Trump said the U.S. would run Venezuela until there can be a proper transition. We're going to run the country, Trump said at a news conference from his Mar-a-Lago estate. U.S. oil companies would spend billions of dollars in Venezuela to fix its oil infrastructure. The plan includes taking a tremendous amount of wealth out of the ground and sharing it in part with the Venezuelans. It would be very tough for Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado to lead the country. The president said Machado, who has applauded Maduro's removal, doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country.
That's very strange. She offered Trump her Nobel Prize for doing it.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe Trump has gotten an accurate briefing, and the briefing said, well, this person is on our side. He wants to be, but doesn't have the support necessary, blah, blah, blah. So, but if there's more money in play, if there's oil companies in play, if there's more money in play.
Premature. What are you talking publicly about how the country's going to be governed when you haven't done anything?
I don't know. I don't know why he's saying that.
Oh, it's like a brilliant operation. Yeah, of course it's brilliant. You snatched Maduro out of his own headquarters. But the problem is, what have you accomplished? The idea, the making everything into a kind of personality thing. Like it's people that own stuff. Like Maduro owned Venezuela. Now we own it because we got Maduro. No, it doesn't work that way. It's a country. It's got its structures. It's been taken over by communists. The communist structures control the country. Unless you break those structures down and put power back in the hands of other people, you don't haven't accomplished anything. Maduro's replaceable. Putin's replaceable.
Mm,
Xi is replaceable. These
exactly.
people are replaceable. They're part of a long chain of
It's like a factory
communist
of
enemies.
revolutionaries.
Yeah.
It's
Oh
a
yeah, they're
assembly line.
cadres. There's thousands of cadres. They could replace each other, of course.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
I remember the
amazing.
days of the Bush administration and Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. He had this. I mean, this was like still the earlier internet. This was. I mean, the internet really became a thing in the late '90s, around 2000, and then suddenly you had more than text. You had images, you had audio files, and then first video files and downloads. The 2000s was when the internet really matured, and this is the time when Hugo Chavez in Venezuela was making these video podcasts. He was filming himself with a table and his notes, like sort of like what we're doing now, but of course from a whole different perspective. And he was just ranting and raving about Bush and the imperialists and yeah, the truthers loved it. I mean, even though they were considered themselves to be right wing, they also loved it because it was going against the Bush administration and the Bush administration, according to the lore back then, was standing for the New World Order conspiracy. This was like the total New World Order thing. But yeah, this was a wild time. This was a wild time back then, and I think I remember that confidence or faux confidence back then from the Bush admin. I mean, like, yeah, we can do anything. We can do. It sounded like a bit what we hear from Trump now. Oh, we're gonna run Venezuela. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do that. I'm gonna make a deal with North Korea. I'm gonna solve this problem in 24 hours. But I think that the Bush admin was more convinced of their own grandiosity. I think they were genuinely convinced they could do all kinds of things, and no competitor was gonna mess things up for them in a big way. But I think now with Trump, I mean, Trump is the way he is. I mean, he's always talking the biggest game. I'm the fastest, I'm the best, I'm gonna do it. I can do everything. But the system behind Trump, with Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, and all that stuff. The system behind Trump, I think they're more nervous than they let on. I mean, they've talked about this in public various times when they make some very accurate statements about the Russian threat or the Chinese threat. I think the super confidence is over. I think it's a more realistic situation or mindset now, even though Trump is still talking that big game. We see. Let's see how this play
Well,
out. I
he's
mean,
saying, I don't know. Are we in possession of Fort Tiuna? I mean, it sounds like we assaulted Fort Tiuna and took Madura. That means we have a small ground in the country. Is the communist, groupings in the country, the Cubans, the Russians, the Chinese, the IRCG, in there, are they going to just throw down their arms and run away now because they feel that they've been demoralized, that the head's been cut off the snake? I don't understand this. It's sort of like, the assumption we know that when Paris fell in 1940 to the German army, France started to sue for peace. Shortly thereafter, we know that the Germans expected, if they took Moscow, that the Soviet Union would sue for peace or collapse. In many cases, taking the capital of a country or taking its leader, what was it when Hitler overthrew Admiral Horthy in Hungary? He got control of Horthy through his holding his son hostage, if I recall correctly, and then was able to install a a pro-Nazi government because Horthy was really trying to make a separate peace. I think is why Hitler intervened in Hungary, and um, 1944. So the question is, in this whole thing is what is the position of these special forces inside Venezuela with regard to the rest? And are we invading the country now? Is there an invasion underway? Are we bringing tanks into the country now to back up the special forces commandos? Because you can't control a country with commandos. So it is unclear, but I don't understand it yet. If this is a theory that we get Maduro, that they're done and now we rule the country, that theory has to actually play out in actual subsequent events,
Yeah, much of
right?
it is obfuscated. It's very opaque and on purpose. And for a long time, the focus was not on Venezuela. I mean, all these other things, they captured our attention, our imagination, and but suddenly, the focus is on Venezuela. But we've seen this over and over again when a country is in the focus for a short time and then everybody forgets about it, and then it's in the focus again, everybody forgets about it, and it repeats itself a couple of times, and nobody's really expecting anything major to happen, but then something really big happens, right? Saw that with Ukraine. I mean, we warned about this ages ago, but in general, people forgot about it, and they forgot about it again, and it's just posturing. It's just Putin is just playing a game. He just wants some concession, a new pipeline or whatever. But then came a full blown invasion. It became the biggest land war in Europe since World War II. We got the story from like 10 hours ago. Venezuela orders general mobilization to counter, of course, imperialist attack. They talk about a mobilization of the country's social and political forces. They don't say military forces. The government said it had decreed a state of emergency and would immediately proceed to armed struggle following a wave of strikes that the government said were conducted by the U.S. So by removing or snatching the head of state, now the communist government, the communist government in Venezuela is also setting things in motion. There are certain
Right.
moves that you can't go back from. You cannot walk back from it. You set something in
No.
motion, and then it goes on and on and on. And
Well, and Trump, it's almost like Trump is trying to bribe the Venezuelan people. Here's a
yeah,
statement he made at his speech. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world. It's always going to be big, right? Go in,
biggest.
spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country. And he says, we are ready to stage a second and much larger attack if we need to do so. So we are prepared to do a second wave if we need to. Um, and so after questions from reporters, he said, I don't mind saying it, but we're going to make sure that the country's run properly. We're not doing this in vain. I mean, he's basically saying, yeah, this is the beginning of an invasion. And so we are going to invade the country. We're going to take all of it, and we're going to do it for the Venezuelan people. And he says it's not going to cost the American taxpayers because there's all that Venezuelan oil on the ground, and we're going to use that oil to pay for the liberation of the country and give as much of it to the people because the people there have been suffering and they're poor. And so he's basically holding out the promise of a better life to the Venezuelan people. That's a powerful thing. And by the way, in Brazil, where they hate Lula, they're celebrating right now.
Yeah.
Most of the
Now,
Brazilian people are
it says
celebrating.
here, General Dan Caine, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, said the operation, dubbed Operational Absolute Resolve, biggest ever resolve, was the culmination was the culmination of months of planning and rehearsal. Now, that you would infer from that it also includes an analysis of what would happen afterwards, what the fallout would be, and how the U.S. would have to react to the communist reaction.
I mean,
And
the strategy now is you better run and get out of the way, or you're going to get killed by us when we
yeah,
come
so
after you.
so who's Dan Caine again, right? 22nd chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff since 2025. Served as the associate director for military affairs at the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, from 2021 to 2024.
That's an
So
interesting history.
yeah, he was commissioned in the United States Air Force upon graduation. In 1990, has served in various roles within the Air Force, mainly as an F-16 pilot. So he's like the real deal. as of 2025, Caine has 2,800 flight hours and served 2 tours in Iraq. Assistant Commanding General of Joint Special Operations Command. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so very distinguished career. Caine was among the pilots who protected Washington, D.C. in the aftermath of the September 11 attacks as the chief of weapons and tactics for the squadron. Then his role got expanded. Policy director for counterterrorism and strategy at the Homeland Security Council. Blah, 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 and on and on and on. Then he was involved in Operation Inherent Resolve, campaign against the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. Special access programs, it's like super high classification, right? Special access is like super important. And then CIA's Associate Director for Military Affairs. He earned the nickname Raisin Caine. When I see about his positions.
Now, Attorney General Pam Bondi has put a post on X saying that the Venezuelan leader, Mr. Maduro, is going to face the full wrath of the U.S. justice system. And Trump has commented on this, by the way. It's interesting. He said, "I've seen what we have. It's both horrible and breathtaking that something like this could have been allowed to take place for many years after his term as president of Venezuela expired." The U.S. president said Maduro remained in power and waged a ceaseless campaign of violence, terror, and subversion against the United States of America, threatening not only our people, but the stability of the entire region. That's an interesting statement right there. Very interesting.
Yeah, because we don't know the full picture, right? We don't know the security briefing that the president gets. We know maybe Maduro was involved in something outrageous, and action had to be taken. We don't have all the facts on the table right
outrageous. It's what General Laura Richardson, the former head of Southern Command, had said 4 years ago. The Chinese and Russians are taking over in Latin America, and Maduro is one of their puppets, one of their beachhead boys. And Trump did an interview on Fox before he had his little press conference or meeting there, and it was a phone interview that he did at Fox, and they had scheduled it 4 days ago, which is interesting. And he said that the operation didn't have perfect weather, and they waited 4 days, but they went, and it came off. And General Caine has also made comments about that. The weather broke enough, made the path for the aviators to come in, and the helicopters, and they did it. So but invading the rest of the country, that will be yet to be seen. It's sort of you don't want to count your chickens before they've hatched.
Yeah, but we also don't know yet what they're gonna do with the guy now that they grabbed him, now that they have him, and they want to, they will indict him and have like a procedure. Indict him
in a court of law here in this country. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not shipping him to Guantanamo Bay or some ghost prison. They want to make this proper and legal, I hope. And but now you're gonna see the leftists. You're gonna see classic truther types, pro Russian types, assets and all that. They're all gonna say kind of the same thing. It's U.S. imperialism, totally illegal, totally unwarranted, and Trump just needs a victory, and to because of the polls and the upcoming elections, midterms or whatever, and it's just a stunt to bolster his image as a strongman, blah 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 blah. But what if they have court proceedings and they will declassify some of the stuff that they already have, maybe about Chinese involvement or Russian involvement or some really outrageous stuff that they were planning in Venezuela. And if then facts, independently collected facts, align with what the captured guy is going to say, then it's going to be hard to say it's just imperialism or they tortured him to say these things, but it's going to line up. And And I think this could be an opportunity to present the U.S. government as just very normal, despite Trump's antics and despite all the focus on Trump. It's going to be like yeah, it's like a normal.
Well, we're going to see now whether the Russians and the Cubans and the Chinese, what their move is. Putin is obviously very upset. You maybe saw Dugin made a statement saying this is outrageous. Going against Trump is now gone against MAGA is again. He's gone against MAGA. He's gone against his base, right? And so on. And Putin is warning, don't go anywhere near our tanker. I guess they're chasing one of these Shadow Fleet ships, and the Russians are trying to get it to safety before we can board it. And it's part of the blockade of Venezuela. Maybe that ship is carrying nuclear weapons that were bound to, or missiles bound for Venezuela. Who knows? Or some kind of weapons. Um, it's interesting. I hope that Venezuela is disarmed, that there are no missile strikes against the continental United States from Venezuela, like we saw against Tel Aviv that the Iranians did during the operation that the Israelis carried out, which has contributed, of course, to this collapse in Iran and hopefully a regime change there. But I guess we'll see what happens, whether the strategy is calibrated properly and they've correctly analyzed the forces in Venezuela, what that is going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like, I mean, we saw some initial statements or quick statements on X from various people, influencers. I mean, some of the stuff was what we expected. It's oh, it's bad. How can they do that? And it's not. It's like, so, with the globalists and blah blah blah. There's like one surprise to me, and but of course, there's also a kind of a sleazy explanation for that one. I was a bit surprised by Alex Jones.
Yeah,
Alex,
what did Jones do? He's been attacking Candace Owens, and it's been like a
oh
Candace
yeah,
Owens
he's fighting with Candace
Alex
Owens
Jones
because
war. It's like Candace is so crazy. She's making Alex look bad because he'd been associated with her kind of way of going about things. But now he's drawing a line in the sand, and he's against Candace Owens. What in the
yeah.
heck does it mean?
Well, I think basically what happened is, I mean, kind of a bunch of influencers. They thought they could, they thought they could benefit from Candace Owens, from her because she's young and she's fresh and she has this big following, and people thought they could, benefit from her, use her, and just manage the downsides and manage the fallout and end up in the plus with her. But then when
Well,
she just
for a while she seemed like a respectable
yeah, but then when
conservative girl,
she goes even more crazy and more radical, and then she
very
has
crazy.
these wild theories about the Charlie Kirk murder, and then she has these
Oh my
insiders
gosh,
and
she
sources
was
and
implying
nothing.
that Charlie Kirk's wife was involved in, and of course
Yeah,
now
and
she's backing away from
Egyptian
that.
airplanes, yeah, and Egyptian airplanes and all that, and so none of that really works out. And then so these other influencers, I think the initial reaction of Alex Jones was, yeah, let's not make a big deal out of it. Was what Candace was saying. I think she was just, she listened to some bad people. It's gonna be okay. So people were trying to still work with Candace Owens and discipline her and try to, nudge her along the right way, so to say. But she wouldn't have it. She would just attack everybody who was trying to contain her. And that's when Alex Jones fully turned on her and said, I'm going to war against her. I just, going to war against her because he couldn't stay silent because his audience was demanding he take a standpoint on that. And also,
Oh, boy.
Jones is also competing with Candace Owens. They're competing for the same audience and the same money, so there's always that. And so then
They
I
have to
saw
bring
this.
people back within what they think is going to be a successful narrative. They
Yeah,
can't go into
exactly. So
Disneyland
then
trying
I
to
saw this. This is from 4 hours ago. And we're recording this on the 3rd of January.
Saturday. Yeah.
This is from the Real Alex Jones Twitter or X account. Here, real Alex Jones. It says Maduro asked for a fight, and history gave him a knockout. Elon fights with satellites and code. Maduro fought with rhetoric and electronic voting machines, stealing U.S. elections. Trump just chopped the head off of one of the deep state's biggest funding mechanisms. All right, so he's crafting a narrative that's supposed to benefit Alex Jones. He wants himself to benefit from whatever he's saying. He knows that some of his audience is going to be skeptical because, no foreign entanglements, and the Russians, they love Venezuela. But so he's framing it in that way and saying, well, this is a great victory, against the deep state, right? Even though the Russians are hopping mad, even though Alex Jones was really buddy with Alexander Dugin, being on each other's shows a bunch of times, and Alex was on the biggest show, interviewed by the biggest media guy in Russia repeatedly, and the guy offered Alex Jones asylum if he ever needed to flee the US, but that's another story. So this is like Jones's interpretation. So yeah, this is great. This is great, and it's supposed to be great for me too, and but then he wants to, steer that energy, steer that opinion away from this because he really doesn't like the Venezuela thing. He says this, now we need to see the same type of energy here on the home front. And again, next post, Nicolas Maduro in custody is a good start. Now we need to move to domestic enemies. So no foreign entanglement, nothing that will disturb the Russians.
That's the whole Civil War narrative of Alex Jones. We want a civil war and we want it now. That's his whole thing. It's this is what makes him dangerous.
Yeah, and it goes on. It goes on 2 hours ago. Alex Jones, I'm about to break exclusive intel on why Trump went into Venezuela and what comes next. Watch and share this feed now. So he wants to tell you the big secrets on why this happened, even though, in general terms, it's understandable why this, or why you would move against Venezuela in one form or another. But it's like, yeah, he's just gonna come up with something that benefits himself, that's gonna keep the audience engaged and pay money to Alex Jones to continue his career. But he doesn't like the Venezuela thing. He doesn't, he's not gonna like interference in Iran. He's not gonna like anything that disturbs the Russians. But it was a communist dictator that got kidnapped, so he can work with that. But that communist dictator was allied with Russia, and the Russians are pissed. And Jones is going to be, Jones has weird contacts. There's going to be some people that are going to talk to Jones now behind the scenes, and they're not happy. And they somehow want to steer this thing. Because it goes against Russian propaganda, because Russian propaganda, to a large degree, is aimed at a right-wing audience, and they want to say that, Russia is the beacon of light and hope and Christian conservative values and the white race and all that. So right wing. So how can the Russians now complain? If when a communist dictator gets kidnapped, right? It kind of creates a little problem here for the pro-Russian camp here, for the propaganda. We'll see what comes out of that. And even when Jones comes with something, saying, I got my super intel, I talked to, General Flynn or whatever, or some of these other people that he associates with, I have exclusive intel. I tell you the secrets, but he doesn't know the real reasons. He doesn't know what's going to happen next with Venezuela and with the dictator in custody, what the evidence is going to be, and if there's something that's going to come out in a public trial, something that comes out that has to do with the Russians, and that's going to be a really bad day for Alex Jones. When that when that happens, or if that happens, he has to do some mental gymnastics like crazy to explain to his audience, what this all means. Just come up with some 4D chess explanation here. And same with Iran, same with Ukraine. When now we're hearing again that Trump is losing his patience, and Trump posted or reposted some article from, I think, the New York Post or something, where they said some super negative things about Putin and the Russian regime, and how Putin wants to prolong this war and all that. So Trump, as far as I remember, Trump shared that article. So it's not as simple as people thought, right? It's not as
Well, by
simple
the
as people thought.
way, Trump and Secretary of State Rubio have said basically in so many words that the Cuban people are suffering. And so we have to do something about that. So I think Cuba's next. I
That would
think
be
Cuba's
interesting.
next.
That would be
And
interesting.
if that's the case, if they're really serious in this big buildup, look, was only yesterday. Was it yesterday, day before yesterday? I was on with Lee Wheelbarger, and I was shocked when he said, "Oh, I don't believe they're going to invade Venezuela." And I thought, you got to be kidding. This would be a travesty if we have this big deployment and we don't actually invade, because this is an invasion type deployment. You better not be putting that many forces concentrated in one place and not do an offensive, because you're wasting money and resources and people's time, and you're taking resources away from the defense of Europe and the Western Pacific. You better use your time wisely and your forces wisely to accomplish something. And of course, taking Cuba, oh my gosh, what an incredible thing to liberate Cuba and Venezuela. What a tremendous achievement that will be. I just say communism being actually rolled back in the Western Hemisphere. It's tremendous. Thank goodness for Secretary of State Rubio, who I think is probably the real architect of this.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe we will see that point, or maybe we won't see that point, where they will, in public, admit that, well, not only was this a deep collaboration for a long time between the Russians and the Chinese, and they lied about it, but that it's what everybody can independently verify, that Russia is run by these people from the Leningrad Fifth Directory of the KGB, and because I think we haven't seen that yet. I mean, we saw a lot of talk about China. Trump was very anti-China. Other in the administration were very anti-China. It's a big competitor, and it's like this communist government. But we haven't seen the same kind of rhetoric when it comes to Russia. It's but that may change at some point, because when you have a confrontation on that scale, you need to explain to the people who the enemy is. You need catch all terms. You need some general description so people can understand that it's a bloc. You're fighting a coalition of states that are very similar, and they're very integrated, and they've been integrated for a long time. So eventually, I mean, the communism word has to come up when it comes to Russia, right?
Well, I mean, they haven't been using the word with Venezuela enough, in my opinion. They're just calling him a drug lord. Look, I guess they don't want the left to react wrong. I guess that's the
Yeah,
rhetorical
yeah.
covering they're using. But I mean, it's better to be honest. But good grief. Wow, if they're going to, the way they're talking, Cuba's next. And Cuba's completely surrounded in a sea of American force. And there's no way, if we want to, Cuba's in a weak state. Cuba's in an economic state similar to that of Venezuela and Iran.
And maybe
And
Greenland
if
is
we,
gonna join the US or something. Greenland is
I don't
next.
think so. I hope they're not serious about that. I mean, I'm
Well, not
Scandinavian heritage.
invading, not taking Greenland by force, but I mean Greenland, kind of
They don't want to be part of
joining
the
an
U.S.
alliance. Greenland joining an alliance with the U.S. More integration. That would be cool. Right?
Well, I think look, Scandinavia, the fact that Finland and the Nordic countries, at least Finland and Sweden, joined NATO. We have had B-52 bombers land in Sweden for the first time. We're integrating our forces with the Swedish and Finnish militaries. We're selling F-35s to Finland now. They had a ceremony. These are big steps. Russia's going to have to use nukes if they want to break out of this militarily. And of course, that's the big fear, that the Russians and Chinese will use nuclear weapons directly against the United States. And that is our weakness. We are not ready for a nuclear type war. Would the Russians and Chinese dare to do it? Most observers say no. Oh no, they wouldn't be that crazy. I'm not so sure. I'm not so
Yeah, and
sanguine.
of course there's this proxy Muppet puppet type situation where communist bloc or the communist center, they can use one of their puppets to strike the West or the U.S. With a nuclear weapon or two or more. And then, of course, the center can play dumb and say, well, Moscow, Beijing, they can say, well, we didn't order this. This was North Korea. This was Venezuela. This was some desperate comrades that just saw no other way. We didn't order this. Of course, they can play dumb. Of course, they can play stupid. So in that case, people shouldn't whine about when there's CIA involvement in Latin America, and there's relationships that are being built and operations that are being conducted. I mean, it's like what are we up against here? It's like this constant whining to this day about every single thing that the CIA did, which uh, during this crazy time when nuclear arsenals were so big, and so it became sort of an intelligence war. Who's going to capture the hearts and minds of the population, or who's going to control people, control a system with more regular means, and not have full out war. And yeah, I'm wondering. Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering what the grand publicity strategy is of the Trump administration, because I think they've been twisting and turning in public a lot. They've been very
They certainly
paradoxical.
misled me into believing. They certainly misled me into believing that they were really helping Russia, and now they do
Yeah,
this.
I mean the
It's really quite
entanglements were
surprising.
crazy. I've been reporting on this since 2015 stuff. With I mean, if this was just trial balloons, it was a crazy amount of crazy ass trial balloons. Or if this was some experiments, crazy dangerous experiments, or if this was carelessness, it was crazy carelessness. And also if there was an element of deception in there, this was a dangerous ploy if they did that. And so
I mean,
I
can
was.
you imagine? We moved. I heard the news before Christmas that we were moving. Was it before Christmas? No, it was after Christmas. We moved 150 tanks into Trinidad, which is just 7 miles off the coast of Venezuela. So, you just have a helicopter, or you have some, not a helicopter, you have some kind of bridging equipment or some kind of little transport vehicle that can carry tanks, one of these amphibious vehicles. You can start ferrying tanks across that strait, and you've got a path where you're bringing tanks into the country. You know, I thought as soon as that number of tanks, it has to be an invasion of the mainland, right? I
That
mean,
as
why
well. I
would you
mean,
in an island?
I'm not up to speed on the current capabilities of the regime in Venezuela. I mean, what they have, they
They
built
have,
a.
they supposedly have something like 150 T 72s. Those are old Cold War era. They were using those in the 70s, right? Saddam Hussein was using those, and the Republican Guard got its butt kicked when it ran into our Abrams tanks. The Abrams tank has a much further range. It hits a lot harder. Its armor is a lot better.
Yeah, and you saw
Basically, you just wipe
these all
out,
these Soviet tanks pop in Ukraine all over the place.
right? Yeah, well, of course, Ukraine, they were using those new, anti-tank
The
rockets that go up and then
javelins
pass
and
through the
yeah.
the javelins. Yeah, but this is heavy tanks and used along the flat coastal areas and the beach areas to secure those areas. Those things can hit from a long ways away, and those gun crews are well trained. Those American gun crews. And the problem is just above those beaches. That's where the tank force, the Venezuelan tank forces are. And of course, if you want to kill 150 obsolete tanks, you bring in 158 better tanks, and there's no match. I mean, I don't know that we lost a single tank in that battle we had in the fog at point blank range. By the way, we didn't get advantage
Hmm.
of our range. I don't think we lost a tank. We wiped out the entire Republican Guard elite division. What was it, the Hammer Brabi a tank regiment of the Hammurabi Division was wiped out. And we did it because our tank crews were better drilled, we were better tanks, and I believe those were G-72s.
Yeah, and I mean the mentality. I mean, we talk about the question of who's going to join the American forces, who's going to join American leadership or guidance or whatever, who's going to take the American side, who's going to take the communist side, who's going to try to remain neutral or whatever. And it's also a question of the culture and the people over there, how they are, what they are. And I mean, I spent weeks and just weeks in Panama and in Costa Rica. My wife actually had spent years in different countries like Chile. She was working for a person who was the descendant of some very high-ranking guy in Chile, and and the sons have now her sons have now joined the woman she was working for. Her sons have now joined the military and sort of very pro-German and pro-order and all that stuff. So there's that. There was kind of like a certain influences from Europe, German influences in various places. And in some places you're very welcome as a German, actually. When they're sometimes they're very suspicious of Yankees because of all the propaganda and all this stuff.
Right.
But when you're German, you look like a Yankee. But when you're German, they really like you in places like Chile very often. And also when you're in Panama, in places like Costa Rica, you move through the country, and they're into soccer. They're into, they're in some ways they're all like us. They love soccer. They love advancing, getting ahead. Getting forward in life. A new job, cities. I mean, the cities are pretty sophisticated. When you're there, it looks fairly European. They drive the same cars as we do. Well, not exactly the same, but there's like you see new cars, you see businesses, you see the stores. They sell the same laptops, they sell the same televisions, and there's office buildings, corporations, this, that, and the other, and it's like even the cost of living is comparable sometimes in these Latin American cities. They have Masonic lodges, that came from Europe or from the U.S. for that matter. They have Masonic lodges, so there's like overlap.
Yeah, Masonry was a very big influence in the liberation movements in Latin America against Spain and also Portugal. So the Masonic lodges had a big role. I think you've got Masonic symbols in the Brazilian flag.
Yeah. So it's kind of a big thing over there. So it's like, but it also it's like there's very similarities, a lot of similarities, and we actually bought, we actually met someone who they had this little house in like a neighborhood of little houses, and they had a few cows, just like we Europeans did, a longer time ago. When you had a few cows and you had a few pigs or whatever, as a side hustle, as a side gig, and she was selling the milk she was producing to a major American company. Ultimately, she was selling to an intermediary who was selling it to a major American company. So, and so there's similarities. They are somewhat like us. And there's also kind of like this other stuff that's going on over there. Some of the native stuff, when they're into these religions like Palo Mayombe and that sort of stuff. Then of course you have in Brazil, you have a lot of people, descendants from African slaves. So there's a whole nother dynamic to that. But regardless, there's the internet and there's culture. And just people are inherently drawn to, America, I think, in some way or another, and consume, just have consumption, have cool products. The young girls, no matter if they, if you see a Brazilian girl and she's, she could be a Brazilian girl, could be European, full on European descendant, light hair, blue eyes. could be a mix of European and native, could be a mix of, anything and African. They love to have makeup. They love makeup. They love fashion. They love, good cars and stuff like that. So there's an inherent power in that. I think the left would call it soft power imperialism, evil consumerism, soft power, devilish imperialism. But people like to have things, it really improves your lives. And so I think that's kind of like a culture battle that's been going on for a while. I haven't seen it long enough, but they're trying to build things everywhere. They're improving the internet. They've been improving the internet. They've had like a sophisticated tech. They still had some outdated stuff, but they're constantly trying to be, on the cutting edge, because you can access anything over the internet. You could learn trades. You could be on the forefront of network technology or some other technology, and or start your own little business and just make money. So that, I think, that cultural aspect is going to decide who's going to join the Americans in Venezuela and who's going to join communism or Russians or Russian. I mean, what does a Latino have to do with Russians or Russian culture, the Russian way of life? Nothing. There's no real, place where they really overlap besides communism. And then you have the Chinese influence. But what's the overlap between Latinos and Chinese? There isn't really anything. I mean, the Chinese, they had to play this faux capitalism game to even get into Latin America. I mean, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to just rebel arouse and say we're all going to be Che Guevaras. They had to play capitalism and offer cheap products made by their communist serfs in order to get into Latin America and bring their products into their, into the shopping malls, really. And
yeah, they're smuggling enormous. They're making fake iPhones and all kinds of things in China, and they're smuggling them into Brazil and other places. Different kinds of electronics and stuff, which are hard to get in those countries.
yeah, but what are they
Yeah,
going to access on these phones?
yeah,
Western
they're going
shows,
to be
American.
spied on. The Chinese are going to
Cool. What
TikTok.
they're gonna watch? They're gonna watch people with cool cars. They're gonna watch stuff about rich people and makeup and cool clothing and cool houses, and they're gonna watch some really capitalist stuff on these communist phones, right? I mean, it's like how do these communists over there? How do they police each other? How do they really, do they win the culture war the way they think they do? If the young generation, they want to have things, they want to be something. How do you talk these young people out of cool cars and makeup and cool clothing and cool watches and everything? It's like,
Mhm.
what's communism
Well, and then you
offering?
feed them
You're
with
gonna be a happy peasant. You're gonna be a potato farmer, like in Mother
and you
Russia. What is that?
you know, and you feed them with this anti-American resentment, as if the Americans stole all the Chevys and Fords in the world and kept them from having any. You know, yeah, it's really crazy. I run into these Brazilians and other South Americans who have this strong American imperialism has caused us so much poverty, and they're this massive distrust. Like, we want to steal the Amazon. America wants to grab the Amazon away from Brazil and take all the natural wealth. It's like, no, that's out of the way. We don't need to do that. We don't. That's not the way we do things. We steal the Amazon. We just gave the Philippines back. We didn't want Cuba when we liberated it from the Spanish. We don't even want Puerto Rico. We've offered them their independence, and
And
they
the
don't want
natives
it.
had
They want.
empires too. I mean, all the natives, they had empires too, and they were pretty grim. Like the Aztecs and the whatever they were called. All
No,
these
but
different.
America's not an empire. It's a republic, and
Yeah.
people keep saying that. I mean, when Pat Buchanan calls it an empire, I get upset. It's like, no, we're a republic. We're not an empire. Where's the imperial territories? Where are they? Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands? Really? We don't want them. We want to give them back. and they don't want to. No, no, don't leave us. We don't want to be governed by ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
It's
it's,
hilarious. I mean, take AOC back. She's Puerto Rican. Take her back. We don't want her.
yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
stupid.
Yeah, so that's gonna be like things are definitely moving. I mean, we're gonna see a counter. I mean, now the communists, they have to come up with a counter reaction to this, snatch and grab operation. They have to project strength now, and that's of course a bit scary. The communists, with all their superpowers lurking in the background, they need to they need to show force now and show that they are capable of doing something, because if they don't show power and force now, more people are going to turn away from them, because ultimately, as you mentioned, Gustave Le Bon in this episode, it's at some point people are going to look at the different options here and say, okay, this is a weak option, going with the communists, and they just let this happen and they didn't really react to it. They can turn on the economy. They can't even protect their own leader. It's like, why do we join these losers? It's no good. It's not gonna get us anywhere. So it's like, yeah, there's gonna be some counter reaction. I think fairly soon. And also, I mean, that it reflects badly on the Russians. The Russians look weak in this so far. The Chinese look weak in this. If they can't protect their colonies like Venezuela, what can they protect? They can't really protect their own oil industry in Russia, because it's being shot to, in Russia, it's being shot to bits by Ukrainian rockets. China still hasn't taken Taiwan. They're still prepping for it. They've been prepping forever, and they're really hesitant to pull the trigger on this. And I think the element of surprise is gone. I mean, it's like all of this careful planning and all this deception and all this secrecy surrounding the true relationship between Russia and China. All this preparation, and now kind of the element of surprise is diminished. It's not gone. It was still a massive deception for the longest time, but I think it's diminished. It's sort of diminished. And I mean, even if the Russians play this card of faking offers, towards the West, say indicating maybe we can abandon the Chinese, maybe we can work something out. We can abandon the Chinese, maybe we can work out something with Ukraine and some other parts of the world. Maybe we can make a deal. I don't think the West would be as naive now as they may have been 10 years ago or 20 or 30 years ago. Because that was always the big kind of thing that the communists had, this opportunity to make a fake offer. The Chinese saying, we may abandon the Russians, and the Russians saying, we may abandon the Chinese if you give us something. And,
Yeah, that fake game, yeah.
Yeah.
And now it looks like we're playing them all, and it does look like that at this moment, that we've played them all, and it looks like Russia is now in a position where the Ukrainians are producing so many drones and their strikes on Moscow. Did you hear they took out the Kibyshev um, oil refinery
No, I didn't hear that
some
one.
hours ago? Yes, the Kibyshev oil refinery, one of the biggest in the country, they took it out with a drone attack. Of course, I don't know how long before it's up and running again, but that is extremely important. And they're on a path, on a campaign to take out a refinery a day, is what I'm told. I'm not sure if they've actually been able to keep that up, but they've hit other oil refineries. There's been brownouts and blackouts in Moscow. Russia is being taken apart bit by bit. Russia's going to be right where Venezuela and Iran are, and of course the question is, would they use nuclear weapons? Seeing this is happening, but Trump's behavior has made them think that they're in control of this game while they're being taken apart. It's kind of interesting to see this. I hope that they know what they're doing. It's obviously a lot of people are saying this is very dangerous. It's brinksmanship. You don't want to be doing this. Russia could start a nuclear war. That's absolutely possible, and I wish we were more prepared for that. But my goodness, Russia is really suffering right now. really. And they're
Yeah, I mean
calling
this
up a lot of people. They called up
the
another more than 250,000 troops now at the
the
beginning of this
clock.
month.
Yeah, the clock is definitely ticking. I have something. Where was that? This was like an older story. This was. I don't think I'm finding it right now. This was about when the Russians would run out of money, out of resources. Uh, for now, I mean, it's of course they are like a unit with the Chinese. They have other capabilities, but in terms of sheer Russian capabilities, they are going to run out in the very very foreseeable future, and that's going to be a very important point. Are they going to make a fake offer? Because that's something that's been in the cards for a while. When Russia says, "Okay, we might sell out the Chinese. We're just for our survival." That would be dangerous offer. But also, there could be a coordinated big series of strikes from the communist bloc because they see no other way. They could they could play this in various ways, but sooner or later we see some bigger steps happening. I mean, obviously, with the Cold War, we saw Vietnam, we saw Korea, we saw some other places with various conflicts, and at the end the communists said, okay, we're kind of done, we're kind of broke, this isn't working anymore, so we're gonna have to change. And of course, the hope would be that this all resolves itself somewhat in the near future. That the communists will say, "We're broke, it's not working, and we're gonna make a deal. We're gonna get at least 20, 30 years of peace, and then we'll see what happens." And they try again with their subversive methods and whatnot and scheme, but it's. I don't think. I mean,
Well, I will
I don't
remind
think
you
it
that
can
the
resolve itself.
mayor of New York is a communist. So, I mean,
Yeah,
we've got AOC running ahead in the polls of JD Vance. So, uh, they're not done. They're never quite
yeah, they're
done,
not
are they?
done. They're not done. But yeah, but it's more difficult now because the gloves are off, and they had to show who they are, and it's more difficult. I think it's more difficult for them to play that game, and because the technology is advancing so fast, you cannot plan that well anymore into the future. You say you have a 5-year plan, you have a 10-year, 50-year plan. You don't know what game-changing technology is going to be around the
Yeah,
corner, or if
it
you're
is very much
blindsided.
happening. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're
Hmm.
blindsided, you're still making X nanometer chips, but the West is making is way ahead of you, and other weapon systems, and they're ahead of you. They can
The
make this on
Russians are
scale.
producing basically inferior, tanks and armored fighting vehicles and stuff
Yeah,
for their army and using old World War One style artillery.
and the moment there's an effective defense system against nuclear weapons, biological and chemical weapons, then of course it would be game over for the communists if the West has this defensive capability.
Absolutely game over. That's the only thing they've got going for them is the nuclear weapons that they mass produce. That's the only thing. That's what they've got. That's the whole of their game now is nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And
Now,
will they use them?
yeah, and of course, I mean, and the in terms of the culture war, I mean, there's a right way, a good way of fighting on that front, and there's bad ways, there's inefficient or counterproductive ways to fight on that front, and I see that, with Alex Jones and Candace Owens and some of these new guys that are coming in, like gay half Mexicans who say they're virgins and whatever, like it gets more weird,
What?
and it gets more crazy. And it gets more crazy, and people say they are the epitome of anti-communism, and they're just crazy or just fascist, just plain old fascist. And so this is of course counterproductive. People have to be very careful what they do culturally and how they interact with other people, because we still
Yeah,
have this problem, because for thousands of years, we didn't have liberty. We didn't have any liberty, and the existing systems in the past, they played the regular people off against each other. They punished loyalty among the peasants, serfs, and various dictatorships. They had these cult-like systems, and you had to inform on each other. And so people were struggling with loyalty. And when Germans started to mass migrate to the new United States, or the young United States, these Germans, and there were a lot of them, they encountered liberty for the first time in their lives. They found peace, they found stability, and they found an environment in which to be loyal in, of course. But with propaganda, be it left-wing propaganda or fanatical truther propaganda or whatever, that's a reintroduction of that infighting, of that lack of loyalty. You don't get real loyalty. You're being told only when you subscribe to my cult, fully commit to my cult, only then are you entitled to any sort of loyalty. But even when you join the cult, you don't get loyalty. You're being used, especially with the communists. I mean, they see you as a little poker chip, a little thing to use. And if the wind changes in Moscow in the center, you could be purged at any moment. So it's like people have to understand the concept of loyalty and have to be aware when people subvert that loyalty. When you have American citizens, they may have grown up differently, but they have to find that common ground, and they have to find that basic loyalty towards each other, and not say, oh, you're this, and so you're the devil, you're the enemy, and I have zero trust in you, and I would never even, you're worthless to me, or you're a problem to me per se. Even though they're all citizens, they're all tax-paying citizens. They all live in the same boat, so to say. So whenever somebody introduces the idea of reducing loyalty towards other people, I mean real loyalty, not cult loyalty, but reducing loyalty towards normal people, you have to pay attention. What is this person saying? Does that make sense? Is it productive? Is it a good strategy so you can end up with more loyalty? Because a lot of people, they don't have any close friends. They don't have any close people that they can really trust. They don't give anybody real loyalty, and they don't get any loyalty from anybody back. And if a population is like that, everybody's kind of isolated. Everybody doesn't have really anybody to trust. That's a breeding ground for political cults. And you don't know, and you're not gonna know who's really running the cult, or what's really gonna happen within that cult, right? So there's a cultural front as well. There's not just the snatching communist dictators and moving troops into position and polishing the rockets. There's also a cultural battleground, a cultural battlefield, and you have to play it right. You cannot get insulted that easily. You cannot overreact, because that's something that the left has been using for a long time. They will provoke and provoke and provoke, so you overreact. So you make a fool out of yourself, and you just say things that will harm your interests and that will make you look really bad. And so the commies can say, look, we told you.
Provocation. Yeah. Well, Alex, we've gone 2.5 hours now. Is it about time? Have we covered everything?
Yeah, I think this is it for now. We're gonna be back on a regular basis and cover what's gonna happen next. Let me just show people real quick your website here. It's jrnyquist.blog. It's very, very easy to remember. It's very easy to remember that thing. Here it is. This is where they can find
I've got a new article I'm preparing to get out. I hope today or tomorrow. So.
And there's also a subscription service. There's also books people can buy. People can also find my books on Amazon, ebook and print, and they can also find the ebooks on Patreon. There's different things that I have on Patreon, and that I'm gonna put up some more stuff on there, because things have a price point. This is the more resources we have, the more we can do, the more effect we can have, and in some ways, it's a pay to win scenario. It's not just about how smart you are. How much you know, how good you are. There's also a price attached to it. Sometimes there's also a pay to win factor.
Hmm. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for another edition of Friends and Enemies. I'm Jeff Nyquist. My co-host has been Alex Benish. He's in Germany. I'm in the U.S., and so we get the perspective of both Europe and America. Thank you for joining us, and hope you will be back with us next week.